I am Naomi, 31 years old, and my wedding day began with the ultimate betrayal. Your brother trip matters more than your little party, my mother texted me. By dawn, my parents had flown out with him. I walked the aisle on the arm of a man I had known for 3 weeks. I smiled and married the love of my life. By Monday, a clip of that moment hit 5 million views. My mother called 81 times screaming that my father boss had seen it. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a toxic family who completely underestimated your worth. The morning of my wedding was supposed to be a time of joy and celebration. I was sitting in the bridal suite of a stunning historic estate in Georgia. The sunlight was filtering through the large windows, catching the delicate lace of my wedding dress. I was staring at myself in the floor-length mirror, trying to take in the reality that I was finally marrying Marcus. But my phone buzzed on the antique vanity table. The message from my mother Valerie sat on the glowing screen like a physical blow to my chest. Your brother trip to Paris matters more than your little party. We boarded the flight with Jamal and Brittany. Do not make a scene. I did not break down in tears. I had spent too many years crying over my parents and their blatant favoritism. I simply adjusted my veil, making sure my makeup was flawless. I picked up the phone and dialed her number. She answered on the second ring, the background noise unmistakably, the first-class cabin of an international flight. I could hear the clinking of real glass, and my mother politely ordering a beverage from a flight attendant. Mom, I said, my voice incredibly steady. You are actually on a plane to Paris right now. My wedding starts in exactly 2 hours. Valerie sighed loudly, projecting that familiar sound of deep annoyance she always reserved exclusively for me. Naomi, do not do this right now. Brittany is pregnant and she has been so incredibly stressed lately. She needed a baby moon to relax before the baby arrives. Your brother Jamal is building an empire and he needed a break from all his hard work. You are marrying a guy who fixes computers for a living, and you just run a little party planning business. It is a small gathering. Why do you even need us there anyway? I closed my eyes and took a deep, centering breath. Marcus was not just a guy who fixed computers, but I had let my parents believe whatever they wanted, because correcting their assumptions was always an exhausting waste of energy. And my public relations agency was absolutely not a little party planning business. I managed high-level crisis communications for some of the biggest corporate names in the country. I had built a highly successful company from the ground up. But in my family, my older brother Jamal was the golden child. Jamal was the brilliant entrepreneur, even though his businesses always failed spectacularly, and my parents always drained their accounts to bail him out of his financial messes. My parents had emptied their remaining savings to buy him and his entitled white wife Brittany a luxury European vacation, completely abandoning their only daughter on her wedding day, without a second thought. Brittany had never liked me. She constantly made passive-aggressive comments about my natural hair, my clothes, and my neighborhood. She loved spending my parents' money while looking down her nose at the very black family funding her extravagant lifestyle. She played the victim perfectly, and my mother always rushed to comfort her. I am not making a scene, Mom, I replied softly, answering my tone betrayed no emotion. I am just making sure I understand the situation perfectly. You chose to fund a luxury vacation over giving your daughter away at the altar. Your father and I gave you life, Valerie snapped back, her voice dripping with venom. We do not owe you a walk down the aisle. Have a nice little party, Naomi. She hung up the phone. The line went completely dead. The silence in the spacious bridal suite was deafening. I looked at my reflection again. The strong, independent black woman I had fought so desperately hard to become was trembling just a little bit. But I refused to let their cruelty ruin the most important day of my life. Suddenly, the heavy oak door of the bridal suite swung open. My wedding coordinator rushed in, her face pale with absolute panic. Naomi, the string quartet is playing the bridal march. The groomsmen are in place at the altar. But your father is not in the hallway. We have nobody to walk you down the aisle. We need to delay the ceremony right now to find him. I shook my head firmly. We are not delaying anything. I will walk alone. I grabbed my bouquet of white orchids, gripping the stems tightly. I was ready to face the pitying stares of my guests. I was fully prepared to swallow my pride and make the long, lonely walk down the aisle by myself. Just then, a deep, calming voice stopped us. "Excuse me." Mr. Henderson stepped into the room. How was the owner of the historic estate I had rented for the wedding? A distinguished black man in his mid-60s, he was dressed in a sharp, immaculate tuxedo. I had only known him for 3 weeks since booking the venue, but we had shared warm, meaningful conversations about his beautiful property and the rich history of his family, building a legacy in the South. He looked at me, his eyes full of gentle, profound understanding. He had clearly overheard the frantic coordinator and deduced exactly what was happening. "I have 2 daughters who stubbornly refuse to marry," he said with a warm, reassuring smile that reached his eyes. "Would you do an old man the enormous honor of walking you down the aisle today?" Tears finally pricked the corners of my eyes, but they were tears of profound gratitude, not sorrow. The universe had a way of providing exactly what you needed when the people who were supposed to love you fell short. I took a deep breath, looked at this kind stranger, who was showing me more paternal grace and respect than my own father ever had in my entire life, and I smiled brightly. "It would be my absolute honor, Mr. Henderson." I took his offered arm, feeling a massive surge of strength replace my heartbreak. We stepped out of the bridal suite together, leaving the dark disappointment of my toxic parents far behind us forever. I was totally ready to finally marry my wonderful Marcus. The heavy wooden doors of the sanctuary opened slowly. The warm afternoon sunlight poured into the room, illuminating the smiling faces of our gathered guests. I hooked my arm securely through Mr. Henderson's arm. His presence was a steady, comforting anchor as we stepped forward onto the white runner. The music swelled through the space, a beautiful acoustic rendition of my favorite love song. Every eye in the room turned toward us. There were immediate whispers, of course. My extended family members and close friends noticed instantly that my father Richard was missing from my side, but I kept my posture perfect and held my head high. At the end of the long aisle stood Marcus. He wore a tailored charcoal suit that fit his broad shoulders perfectly. When he saw me walking with Mr. Henderson instead of my father, a brief flash of confusion crossed his handsome face. But that confusion was quickly replaced by an expression of pure, fierce love and unwavering support. As we finally reached the altar, Mr. Henderson placed my hand gently into Marcus' hand. "You look absolutely breathtaking today," Marcus whispered softly. He reached up with infinite tenderness and gently wiped a single tear that had escaped and rolled down my cheek. "Where are they?" he asked softly, his eyes searching mine. "I will tell you everything later," I whispered back, squeezing his hands tightly. "Right now, it is just you and me." The ceremony was entirely magical. We exchanged vows. We had written ourselves promising to build a lifelong partnership based on absolute truth, deep respect, and unwavering support. We promised to be the loyal family for each other that we had always desperately needed. The reception that followed was a joyous, vibrant celebration of chosen family over toxic blood obligation. We danced for hours, we laughed until our sides ached, and we toasted to beautiful new beginnings together. What I did not know was that during the ceremony, my best friend and maid of honor Kiara had recorded the exact moment Mr. Henderson walked me down the aisle. She knew the entire sordid history of my family toxic dynamics. She had watched me cry over their constant rejections and blatant favoritism for years. Fueled by righteous anger on my behalf, she posted the beautiful tear-jerking video on her social media account while we were cutting the wedding cake. Her caption was simple but utterly devastating to anyone reading it. "My best friend parents abandoned her on her wedding day to take her golden child brother and his entitled wife on a luxury vacation to Paris. So the kind venue owner stepped in to walk her down the aisle. Chosen family is real and true love always wins." I was completely unaware of the massive digital storm currently brewing online. Marcus and I left our wedding reception wrapped in a beautiful bubble of pure happiness. The very next morning, we boarded a flight for our honeymoon. We had rented a secluded, stunning villa in the beautiful Caribbean to celebrate our new life together. For the first 2 days of our trip, We kept our phones strictly on Do Not Disturb mode. We spent our precious time swimming in the crystal-clear private pool, eating fresh tropical fruit on the sunny terrace, and enjoying the absolute peace of being completely disconnected from the demanding outside world. Fast forward to Monday morning. The bright tropical sun was streaming through the sheer white curtains of our spacious bedroom. We were tangled in the comfortable sheets, enjoying the quiet, lazy morning together. I reached over to the wooden nightstand to check the time on my phone. The exact moment I disabled the Do Not Disturb mode, the device nearly jumped out of my hand with a violent buzzing. It vibrated continuously, a relentless, non-stop stream of notifications flooding the glass screen. I sat up quickly, blinking against the bright morning light, trying to comprehend exactly what I was seeing. There were frantic text messages from distant cousins I had not spoken to in several years. There were dozens of urgent alerts from various social media applications. But what truly made my stomach drop was looking at the recent call log. I had exactly 81 missed calls. Every single one of them was from my father Richard and my mother Valerie. They had been calling me back to back since 4 in the morning. My heart began to race in my chest. A missed call from my parents usually meant a demanding request for emergency money to bail my brother Jamal out of financial trouble. 81 missed calls meant an absolute unprecedented catastrophe had occurred. I opened a direct text message from Kiara. It just said, "Naomi, call me right now. Look at the video immediately." I opened the application with trembling fingers. The video Kiara had posted of Mr. Henderson giving me away was the very first thing to pop up on my feed. I stared at the numbers at the bottom of the screen in pure, unadulterated shock. The video had completely exploded overnight. It had over 5 million views. There were over 40,000 comments scrolling by at lightning speed. People from all over the world were tearing my parents apart in the comments section. They were heavily criticizing Jamal, dragging Brittany for her entitlement, and widely praising Mr. Henderson for his unbelievable kindness. The internet had rallied behind me, a complete stranger, offering far more support in 48 hours than my own parents had given me in my entire 31 years of life. My phone vibrated in my hand once again. It was my father calling for the 82nd time. I took a deep breath, looked at Marcus, who was now wide awake and watching me with deep concern, and I accepted the call. The peaceful silence of our tropical honeymoon villa was instantly shattered by the loud sound of my father screaming through the tiny speaker. The true devastating consequence of their selfish actions was about to hit them like a runaway freight train, and I was finally ready to let it happen right now. I pressed the green accept button on the screen and raised the phone to my ear. My father did not say hello. He did not ask if I was having a beautiful honeymoon. He did not offer a single word of apology for abandoning his only daughter on her wedding day. Instead, his voice exploded through the speaker with a level of pure, unadulterated panic I had never heard from him before. "Naomi, take that video down right this second!" Richard bellowed, his heavy breathing making the audio crackle. "Do you have any idea who just shared it? You need to call whoever posted it and delete it immediately." I sat up against the plush white pillows of the villa bed. The warm Caribbean breeze gently rustled the sheer linen curtains, a stark, beautiful contrast to the absolute toxic chaos erupting through my phone. Marcus shifted beside me on his mattress. He placed his large, warm hand over my knee, his dark eyes watching me with steady, quiet support. I did not flinch. For the very first time in 31 years, my father yelling did not send a rush of debilitating anxiety through my veins. It just sounded entirely pathetic. "Sterling Crawford saw it!" Richard continued to scream, his voice echoing off the high vaulted ceilings of my bedroom. "Do you hear me? Sterling Crawford." I knew exactly who Sterling Crawford was. Every single time my father opened his mouth at Sunday family dinners, it was to worship the ground that man walked on. Sterling was the highly respected African-American chief executive officer of Vanguard Holdings, the massive financial conglomerate that owned my father branch. Richard had spent the last 4 years doing absolutely everything in his power to impress Sterling, desperately trying to secure a highly coveted promotion to vice president. Sterling was famously known across the corporate world for his strict moral compass. He built his entire billionaire brand on loyalty, community, uplift, and unbreakable family values. He put it on his professional network. Richard was hyperventilating now. He shared the video to his 50,000 followers. He wrote that he is disgusted by parents who abandon their children and that character starts at home. My entire professional network is seeing this right now. My colleagues are sending me screenshots. You are destroying my entire career over a stupid temper tantrum. Fix this right now. Before I could even formulate a response to his ridiculous demands, the sound of loud, dramatic sobbing pierced through the receiver. It was my mother. Valerie was wailing in the background, making sure her absolute distress was front and center for me to hear. It was not the cry of a mother who deeply regretted missing her child walking down the aisle. It was the loud, theatrical cry of a woman whose carefully curated, fake social image had just been violently shattered into a million unrecoverable pieces. "Richard, my reputation is entirely ruined," Valerie sobbed loudly, her voice shrill and full of self-pity. "Sister Jenkins just removed me from the Pastoral Anniversary Planning Committee. The Women Ministry group chat is treating me like a complete outcast. They are calling me a deadbeat mother. Tell Naomi to issue a public apology immediately. Tell her to post a statement saying her account was hacked and the video is fake." "I cannot delete a video I did not post, Dad," I said. My voice was eerily calm, completely devoid of the frantic panic they desperately wanted to hear from me. "My maid of honor posted it on her own account. And even if she did delete it right now, the internet is forever. You made your bed when you chose to board a first-class flight to Paris to cater to Jamal instead of walking me down the aisle. Now you have to lie in it." I heard a loud scuffle on the other end of the line. The phone was aggressively snatched away. A high-pitched, demanding voice replaced my father, frantic yelling. It was my sister-in-law, Brittany. "Listen to me. Naomi." Brittany snapped her tone, dripping with that familiar entitled arrogance she always weaponized against me. "You need to fix this mess right now. You are acting like a selfish brat and you are ruining my baby moon. We are standing in the middle of a Chanel boutique in Paris, and this is an absolute nightmare." I could hear the ambient noise of a high-end retail store behind her. Brittany had always believed that marrying my brother gave her a permanent access pass to disrespect our family. My parents always let her get away with her blatant microaggressions because she was giving them their first golden grandchild. "Jamal promised me a designer diaper bag for this trip." Brittany whined, her voice echoing with pure indignation. "But your father's credit card just got declined. Twice. The sales associates are looking at us like we are common criminals. Richard is having a full meltdown over his job. Your mother is crying over her church friends, freezing her out, and my entire luxury shopping trip is ruined because of your petty little party video. Call your friend, make her delete the footage, and figure out what is wrong with your father's bank account before I completely lose my mind." I let her finish her rant. I let the silence stretch for a few deeply satisfying seconds, absorbing the sheer, unadulterated audacity of her demands. They were standing in a luxury boutique in Europe enjoying a trip funded by abandoning me on my wedding day, and they were furious that I was not actively fixing their inconveniences. I looked at Marcus. A slow, genuine smile spread across my face. I brought the phone closer to my mouth, making sure my enunciation was razor sharp. "The video is staying exactly where it is, Brittany," I said, keeping my tone exceptionally bright and pleasant. "And as for the credit card declining at Chanel, there is absolutely nothing wrong with the bank network. It declined because I finally canceled the supplementary card I have been paying off for my father for the last 3 years to protect his credit score from his own terrible financial decisions. Have a wonderful time in Paris." I pulled the phone away from my ear, pressed the red button to end the call, and tossed the device onto the wooden nightstand. We spent the rest of our honeymoon in peace. I blocked my family numbers and focused entirely on the life Marcus and I were building together. When our flight landed back home in Atlanta, I felt rejuvenated. I was ready to leave my toxically exactly where they belonged, far behind in my rearview mirror. Marcus carried our luggage up the front steps of our sleek townhouse. I unlocked the door, expecting the quiet comfort of our private sanctuary. Instead, the heavy scent of my mother's signature floral perfume hit me before I crossed the threshold. We stepped into the foyer and froze. The living room was completely occupied. My father Richard paced furiously in front of our television. My mother Valerie sat stiffly on my velvet sofa, clutching her designer handbag like a shield. My older brother Jamal slouched in Marcus' favorite armchair, wearing a flashy suit that I knew he could not afford. Beside him sat his pregnant white wife, Brittany, aggressively scrolling through her phone with an annoyed expression. They had used the spare key I foolishly forgot to retrieve months ago. They did not look like a loving family welcoming us home. They looked like an angry corporate board ready to execute a hostile takeover. "What are you doing in my house?" I demanded, dropping my heavy tote bag onto the wooden entryway bench. "You do not have the right to break in here without my permission." My father ignored my boundary. He marched straight toward me, his face slick with sweat. "Where have you been?" Richard barked, pointing an accusatory finger directly in my face. "We have been sitting in this cramped townhouse for 4 hours waiting for you to show up. Do you realize the catastrophe you caused? Sterling Crawford called me into his executive office twice while you were off sipping cocktails. My entire promotion to vice president is hanging by a thin thread because of your selfish internet stunt." Valerie scoffed loudly, waving her hand dismissively. "We are not here to discuss boundaries, Naomi. We are here to fix the massive mess you created for this family." Sister Jenkins officially asked me to step down from the church hospitality board yesterday. "The entire congregation is gossiping about us. You need to take responsibility and clean this up right now before your father loses his lucrative job and I lose my standing in the community. You are making decent black families look terrible on the internet." Richard ignored my mother complaining and turned his frantic wide-eyed glare onto Marcus. Marcus stood calmly by the doorway, wearing a simple black t-shirt and jeans, looking entirely relaxed, despite the aggressive home invasion unfolding before us. My father looked him up and down with blatant, undisguised contempt. "You," Richard snapped aggressively, snapping his fingers at Marcus like he was calling a disobedient dog. "You work with computers, right? You fix networks or whatever it is you do for a living. I need you to get on your laptop right now. I need you to hack into LinkedIn and scrub that video from their servers. Then I need you to track down Sterling Crawford, executive assistant, so Naomi can send an apology letter claiming the entire situation was a massive misunderstanding." Brittany rolled her eyes and let out a loud sigh from the armchair. "Honestly, you two need to hurry up and do exactly what he says," she complained, rubbing her slightly pregnant belly. "Jamal and I had to cut our Paris trip short and fly back coach because Richard credit cards are suddenly frozen. Do you have any idea how stressful it is to fly economy while pregnant? You people are so incredibly inconsiderate. My parents would never treat us this way." Jamal nodded in agreement, adjusting his expensive silk tie. "Exactly. Dad career funds my startup, Naomi. If he goes down, we all go down. Tell your tech support husband to stop standing there looking stupid and start typing. We do not have all day to wait around. We have important investor meetings to get to." I opened my mouth to completely tear my brother apart, but Marcus gently placed his hand on my lower back. The steady warmth of his touch grounded me. He did not look intimidated by my father screaming or insulted by my brother's arrogant demands. He simply looked incredibly bored. Marcus walked right past my fuming father, stepped around the sofa where my mother was sulking, and casually made his way into our open-concept kitchen. He pulled a ceramic mug from the upper cabinet and began pouring himself a cup of fresh coffee from the pot I had set on a timer before our flight. My family stared at him in utter disbelief. They were expecting him to cower, to immediately grab a computer keyboard and desperately try to please the wealthy patriarch. Instead, Marcus took a slow, deliberate sip of his dark roast coffee. He leaned comfortably against the cool marble kitchen counter, his dark eyes locking onto mine across the crowded room. He completely ignored the 4 angry people treating our home like their personal war room. "Honey," Marcus said, his deep voice incredibly smooth and perfectly steady. "Should I call Sterling directly, or do you want to handle this yourself?" For a brief second, the room was dead silent. Then a loud collective burst of mocking laughter erupted from my family. Jamal slapped his knee, shaking his head in pure amusement. Richard let out a loud snort, his face twisting into a cruel, dismissive sneer. "Call Sterling directly." Richard mocked, laughing so hard he had to wipe tears from his eyes. "You think Sterling Crawford, the billionaire chief executive officer of Vanguard Holdings, takes phone calls from a broke, low-level IT guy? You think a man who manages global corporate acquisitions is going to pick up his private phone for a guy who resets passwords for a living. Get on the computer now. Before Marcus could even blink at my father's absurd command, Jamal stepped right into the center of my living room. He adjusted the lapels of his shiny, garish cobalt blue suit, a suit I knew for an absolute fact cost over $3,000. He puffed out his chest completely, ignoring the fact that his parents had just skipped his only sister wedding to cater to him. In Jamal's mind, the universe revolved entirely around his needs. Listen to Dad, Naomi. Jamal said, his voice dripping with that unearned, arrogant confidence he had carried since childhood. Just have your husband do his little computer magic and fix this PR nightmare. But once that is done, we have a much bigger family issue to discuss. My new crypto exchange platform is launching next month, and my primary angel investor just backed out. I stared at my brother. My father was hyperventilating about losing his job, my mother was crying about her church social standing, and Jamal was using this home invasion as a pitch meeting. I need you to take out a second mortgage on this townhouse, Jamal demanded, gesturing lazily around my living room. Dad's job is on the line because of your selfish little wedding stunt, so the least you can do is pull your weight for once. The bank will give you at least $100,000 in equity. You owe us, Naomi. I am the one carrying the family legacy, and my unborn son needs a solid trust fund. You and Marcus do not even have kids, so you do not need the extra cash lying around. I felt Marcus shift his weight against the kitchen counter, his eyes narrowing dangerously at my brother, but I held up my hand to stop him. I wanted to hear every single word of their delusion. Brittany scoffed loudly from the armchair. She pushed herself up, smoothing down her maternity blouse, and began pacing around my living room. She ran her fingers over my expensive custom-made ceramic vases, turning her nose up at my carefully curated decor, as if it disgusted her. Honestly, if you two actually had real jobs, instead of throwing parties and fixing Wi-Fi routers, you could easily afford to help Jamal out of pocket. Brittany complained, crossing her arms over her chest. Look at this place. It is so small and cramped. And your hair, Naomi, it is just so wild and unmanageable. I do not understand why you cannot just look professional like your mother. If you tried harder, maybe you could make real money. Now my luxurious Paris baby moon is completely ruined, and I had to fly back on a commercial airline like a peasant, all because of your selfish little stunt. You need to fund Jamal Company today, so I can go back to Europe and shop in peace. My mother Valerie nodded vigorously from the sofa, dabbing her dry eyes with a tissue. Listen to your sister-in-law, Naomi. Jamal is building a real empire. He is going to be a millionaire by next year. You are just jealous because Brittany is giving us our very first grandchild. Your little event planning business is completely unstable. You should be honored that your brother is allowing you to invest in his future. I did not yell. I did not scream. I did not shed a single tear. I calmly walked over to the entryway bench, picked up my designer tote bag, and carried it to the glass coffee table in the center of the room. The room fell silent as they watched me. They expected me to pull out a checkbook. They expected me to surrender just like I had done when I was a terrified teenager trying to earn their love. Instead, I reached into the bag and pulled out a thick, heavy stack of printed bank statements. The paper was bound tightly with a large black binder clip. I dropped the heavy stack directly onto the glass table. The loud smack made Brittany jump back. You want to talk about funding Jamal Empire? I said, my voice dropping to a low, lethal whisper. Let us talk about exactly how this family legacy is being funded right now. I unclipped the stack and spread the papers across the table. These are the financial records for the last 3 years. Every single transaction is highlighted in bright yellow marker. I looked directly at my father, whose face was suddenly draining of color. The supplementary credit card that just declined at Chanel in Paris. That is my card. The one I have been secretly paying off every single month so your precious credit score would not crash, Richard. I picked up the first statement and tossed it onto Jamal's lap. Your luxury apartment downtown, Jamal. The one you brag about on social media to all your fake investor friends. You have not paid rent on that place in 22 months. I pay it. I transfer $4,000 on the first of every single month directly to your landlord so you do not get evicted. Jamal's face went completely slack. He dropped the paper as if it burned his fingers. I grabbed another statement and shoved it toward Brittany, who was staring at me with wide, horrified eyes. Those designer bags you love to flaunt at the country club, the ones you claim Jamal buys for you to celebrate his business milestones, they are paid for by my business accounts. I have been quietly covering your extravagant lifestyle because my mother begged me, literally cried on her knees in my kitchen, telling me that Jamal would go to federal prison for writing bad checks if I did not bail him out. Valerie let out a loud gasp, her hand flying to her mouth. Naomi, how dare you bring that up right now? Family business stays in the family. No, Mom. I replied, my voice slicing through her manipulation like a scalpel. You do not get to use the word family to extort me while treating me like trash. You stood in my house today and told me my business is unstable. You told me I am just throwing parties. My public relations agency grossed over $4 million last year. I am the sole reason you are not all living in a cardboard box. I pointed to the papers covering the glass table. Over $300,000, Jamal. That is how much of my hard-earned money you have burned through pretending to be a successful chief executive. You do not have an empire. You are a broke, unemployed scammer living off the sister you refuse to walk down the aisle. Brittany looked at Jamal, her face flushing a deep, angry red. Jamal, what is she talking about? You told me your seed funding covered our lifestyle. You told me your company was worth millions. Jamal stammered frantically, adjusting his expensive tie, avoiding his wife's furious gaze. Brittany, baby, she is lying. Naomi is just trying to cause drama because she is mad about the wedding. She is manipulating the numbers. I am not manipulating anything, I said coldly. The bank routing numbers match my corporate accounts exactly. While you were boarding a first-class flight to Paris, using the money I gave my parents to keep their house out of foreclosure, I was marrying a man who actually respects me. Richard slammed his fist down on the arm of the sofa, trying desperately to regain control of the room. Enough. I do not care about who paid what rent. That is entirely irrelevant right now. The only thing that matters is my job. Naomi, you will fix this video immediately, or I swear to God I will disown you. Marcus pushed himself off the kitchen counter. He set his coffee mug down with a sharp, definitive clink. He walked slowly into the living room, his tall frame suddenly looking incredibly imposing. The relaxed, bored expression was completely gone from his face. He looked at my father, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Richard, your daughter has carried your financial incompetence for 3 years. Marcus said, his voice deep, authoritative, and utterly terrifying. But that ends today. And regarding your chief executive officer, I think I will give Sterling a call right now. Marcus reached into the front pocket of his dark denim jeans and pulled out his cell phone. The metallic glint of the device caught the morning light streaming through our living room windows. He unlocked the screen with a steady thumb, his expression completely unbitten by the toxic hostility filling the space. Brittany let out a sharp, grating laugh that shattered the brief silence. She threw her head back, her blonde hair bouncing around her shoulders as she looked at Jamal with pure amusement. You cannot be serious, Brittany mocked, pointing a manicured finger at my husband. The IT guy is going to call a billionaire chief executive. He probably fixes the printers in Sterling office building. Put the phone away before you embarrass yourself further, Marcus. Jamal chimed in, immediately aggressively adjusting his cheap designer cuffs. He glared at me. Get your husband under control, Naomi, before he does something incredibly stupid. Dad is already on the verge of losing everything because of your wedding video. We do not need a computer nerd making things worse by harassing a corporate executive. Valerie stood up from the sofa, her church-going facade completely dropping to reveal the bitter, panicked woman underneath. Naomi, if you let him make that call, I will never forgive you. You do not play games with your father's career. You just throw parties for a living. You have no idea how the real corporate world works. Richard scoffed loudly, crossing his arms over his chest. He looked at Marcus with absolute disdain. I have worked at Vanguard for 15 years, Richard sneered. And even I have only spoken to Sterling Crawford twice in my entire life. Put the phone down, boy. You are way out of your league. Marcus ignored every single insult. He simply scrolled through his favorites list, tapped a name, and pressed the speaker icon. He leaned forward and placed the phone precisely in the center of the glass coffee table, resting it right on top of the highlighted bank statements that proved I had been funding my family fraudulent lifestyle. The phone rang loudly. The digital tone echoed off the walls of the tense, cramped room. It rang once. It rang twice. A deep, resonant, and unmistakably authoritative voice filled the living room. Sterling Crawford answered on the third ring. "Good morning, Mr. Chairman," Sterling said warmly, his booming voice carrying a tone of absolute, unquestionable respect. "I trust the honeymoon in the Caribbean was restful. The board of directors has been holding the final acquisition papers for your signature. We need your green light to proceed with the merger this afternoon." Richard stopped breathing. The color violently drained from his face, leaving his skin an ashen, sickly gray. His eyes bugged out of his head as he stared at the small device sitting on the glass table. Jamal's mouth fell completely open. Brittany stopped laughing instantly, her arrogant smirk vanishing into thin air. Marcus leaned forward, resting his strong hands on the edge of the coffee table. "The honeymoon was absolute perfection, Sterling. Thank you for asking. The integration can proceed exactly as planned. But we have a more pressing internal matter to address this morning." "Of course, Marcus." "Name it," Sterling replied without a second of hesitation. "I am currently standing in my living room, looking directly at Richard, the senior branch manager from the Atlanta division." Marcus said, his voice stripping away any remaining warmth and dropping into a cold, ruthless corporate tone. "And I believe we need to initiate a comprehensive forensic audit of his entire department immediately." Sterling's voice turned dead serious on the other end of the line. "Consider it done, Mr. Chairman. I will have the compliance team lock down his branch accounts and freeze his corporate access within the next 5 minutes. Should I dispatch building security to escort him from the premises?" "That will not be necessary just yet," Marcus replied, holding my father's terrified, trembling gaze. "I will handle the initial termination process personally. Have the legal team draft the gross misconduct paperwork. I will review it before noon." "Understood. Have a good morning, Marcus." The call disconnected with a sharp, definitive beep. The silence that followed was so absolute, so heavy and suffocating that you could hear the rapid, panicked breathing coming from my family. Richard's knees physically buckled. He stumbled backward and fell heavily onto the velvet sofa, landing right next to my mother. He looked at Marcus as if he were staring at a ghost. The arrogant, demanding patriarch who had walked into my home ordering us around was completely gone, replaced by a broken, terrified employee who just realized his entire life was over. Valerie was completely paralyzed. The judgmental matriarch who had spent the last hour belittling my business and insulting my husband could not formulate a single coherent word. Her jaw hung open, her eyes darting frantically between Marcus and the phone. Marcus casually reached down and picked up his device, slipping it back into his pocket. Then, with slow, deliberate movements, he unbuttons his plain, understated black cardigan. He tossed it carelessly onto the armchair. Underneath, he was wearing a crisp, custom-tailored dress shirt. He rolled up his left sleeve, exposing his wrist. The heavy brushed gold face of a limited-edition Patek Philippe watch caught the morning light. It was a timepiece that cost more than Jamal's entirely fictional corporate valuation. "Allow me to introduce myself properly," Marcus said, his tone completely shifting from the laid-back husband they thought they knew into the ruthless billionaire titan he actually was. "I am the founding partner and chairman of Vanguard Holdings. That makes me the majority shareholder of the parent conglomerate that just acquired your financial firm, Richard." Brittany's jaw practically unhinged. She looked from the luxury watch on Marcus' wrist to the terrifyingly calm expression on my face, finally realizing how catastrophically she had miscalculated the power dynamic in the room. Jamal stuttered, taking a cautious step backward. "Wait, Vanguard. You own Vanguard. But Mom said you were just an IT guy. You drive a standard sedan. You wear plain clothes." "Wealth whispers," Marcus replied coldly. "Only broke men in massive debt feel the need to scream. I wore plain clothes to your family dinners because Naomi asked me to keep a low profile. She wanted to see if her family could respect a hard-working, ordinary black man who loved her. You failed that test spectacularly, every single one of you." Valerie, realizing that the man she had been verbally trashing for a year was actually a billionaire, instantly flipped her entire demeanor. It was a sickening, transparent display of pure hypocrisy. The woman who just called me a selfish brat forced a massive, bright smile onto her face. She leaped up from the sofa and rushed toward Marcus with her arms wide open. "I knew it!" Valerie cried out joyfully, attempting to wrap her arms around Marcus' neck. "I always knew my beautiful daughter had an amazing eye for men. Oh, my brilliant, successful son-in-law. We were just joking around earlier. You know how family is. We were just testing your boundaries. That little party last month was so rushed, but now we can throw you to a proper lavish celebration." I stepped forward immediately, intercepting my mother before she could touch my husband. I placed my hand firmly against her chest, physically blocking her embrace. I looked her dead in the eyes, my expression entirely devoid of mercy. "Do not touch him," I said, my voice ringing with absolute finality. "You do not get to disrespect my husband for a year, abandon me at the altar, and then hug him the second you find out his net worth. Sit back down, Mom." Valerie recoiled as if she had been struck. She stumbled back to the sofa, her fake smile trembling violently. Brittany, whose gold-digging greed completely overrode any sense of loyalty to her father-in-law. Impending doom suddenly pushed past Jamal. Her eyes were shining with undisguised avarice. She walked right up to Marcus, batting her eyelashes, totally ignoring the fact that her husband's family was currently imploding. "Marcus, wow," Brittany purred, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "Since you are the chairman, you must have an incredible investment portfolio. I am actually launching a premium vegan makeup line. I just need a tiny $5 million seed investment. Family helps family, right?" I repeated her sickeningly sweet words, stepping directly into her personal space. "You stand in my home, insult my hair, insult my business, insult the man I love, and then you have the absolute unmitigated gall to ask him for $5 million. You are not just entitled, Brittany. You are entirely delusional." Marcus did not laugh. He did not blink. He simply turned away from her grasping, greedy hands and walked slowly toward the entryway where he had dropped his leather briefcase. He unfastened the brass buckles with a sharp metallic click that sounded like a judge gavel in the silent room. When he turned back around, he was not holding a checkbook or a pen. He was holding a thick, heavy manila folder sealed with bright red security tape. He walked back to the glass coffee table and slammed the heavy document down right next to his cell phone. The sound made my mother flinch violently. "I did not bring a checkbook to this little family reunion," Brittany Marcus said, his voice dropping into a cold, clinical frequency that commanded absolute terror. "I brought an internal audit report." My father Richard stopped breathing entirely. His eyes locked onto the red security tape and his entire body began to tremble. The arrogant, demanding patriarch who had stormed into my house ordering us around was completely gone. In his place sat a broken, terrified man who knew exactly what was inside that folder. "Let us talk about how family helps family." Marcus continued, stepping toward my father. "As the chairman of Vanguard Holdings, I authorized a forensic accounting sweep of your specific branch the moment I found out how you treated my wife. I thought I would find some mismanaged accounts, or maybe some sloppy bookkeeping. Instead, I found a meticulously organized criminal enterprise. You have been embezzling corporate funds for over 2 years, Richard. $1.2 million to be exact." Valerie let out a blood-curdling shriek. She grabbed her chest, gasping for air, as if she had been physically struck. "Richard, tell me he is lying. Tell me right now that this is a sick joke." My mother was hyperventilating, her mind instantly calculating the devastating social ruin racing toward her. The elite church committees, the fancy high society brunches, the carefully curated image of the perfect wealthy black family living in their spotless brownstone. It was all disintegrating before her very eyes. "It gets much worse," Valerie Marcus said, showing zero mercy to the woman who had tormented me my entire life. "Richard did not just steal the money. He actively funneled $1.2 million in fake client entertainment expenses directly into shell companies registered to your golden child." I turned to look at my older brother. Jamal was backing away toward the front door, shaking his head rapidly. His flashy cobalt blue suit suddenly looked like a cheap Halloween costume. The brilliant entrepreneur, the genius businessman my parents had worshipped while treating me like dirt was nothing but a common money launderer. He had been using stolen corporate funds to finance his luxury apartment, his fake cryptocurrency startup, and his white wife designer wardrobe. "You abandoned me at the altar for this," I said, my voice ringing with absolute crystal clear vindication. You skipped my wedding, you drained your savings, and you treated me like a failure, your entire life, just to worship a sloppy criminal who cannot even steal money without leaving a massive paper trail. You sold your soul for a golden child who produces absolutely nothing. Richard fell heavily off the velvet sofa. He literally dropped to his knees on my hardwood floor, clasping his hands together in a pathetic display of begging. "Marcus, please." Richard sobbed, tears streaming down his face. "I was just trying to help Jamal get his business off the ground. He promised me he would pay it back once his startup went public. I am begging you, man to man, keep this in the family. Do not destroy my life." "You destroyed your own life," Richard Marcus replied, looking down at my father with utter disgust. "And you have exactly 24 hours to try and save your freedom. You will submit your formal resignation to Sterling Crawford by 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. You will wire the entire $1.2 million back into Vanguard corporate accounts before the banks close. If that money is not returned in full, I am handing this red folder directly to the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Wire fraud carries a 20-year federal sentence. Choose wisely." The unified, arrogant front my family had walked in with shattered into a million jagged pieces. The rats immediately turned on each other. Jamal lunged at my father, his face twisted in pure rage. "You said you covered your tracks!" Jamal screamed, grabbing Richard by the collar of his shirt. "You told me the money was clean. You told me nobody checks those specific branch accounts. You set me up to take the fall for your incompetence." Richard slapped Jamal across the face with a loud, vicious crack. "I ruined my entire career for you," Richard roared back, scrambling to his feet. "I risked federal prison because you kept begging for more money to impress your greedy wife. You are a worthless, pathetic leech." While the two men screamed and shoved each other in my living room, Brittany finally realized the empire she married into was a complete and total illusion. The seed funding was a lie. The wealth was stolen. The golden goose was actually facing federal prison. Her gold-digging survival instincts kicked in instantly. Brittany rushed over to my entertainment center and frantically started grabbing my expensive custom electronics. She snatched a high-end smart tablet and tried to shove a priceless ceramic sculpture into her oversized designer tote bag. She was actively trying to steal whatever she could carry to pawn later. I marched across the room and clamped my hand down on her wrist with a vice-like grip. "Drop my things right now, or I will have you arrested for burglary before your husband even makes it to federal court." Brittany ripped her arm out of my grasp. Her face was contorted with an ugly, venomous rage that stripped away every single layer of her fake, polite smile. The mask completely fell off, revealing the vile, entitled racist underneath. "I knew I should never have married into a family of black frauds." Brittany spat, her voice dripping with absolute racial contempt. "I knew it. You people are nothing but ghetto scammers trying to play rich. You are all pathetic. I am not going down with a bunch of common criminals. I am taking my baby, and I am leaving." Jamal stopped fighting with his father and turned around completely stunned. He stared at the woman he had spent hundreds of thousands of stolen dollars trying to please. The trophy wife he bought with embezzled money had just called him a fraud and threw a racial slur at his entire bloodline right to his face. Brittany did not even look back at him. She hoisted her stolen designer bag onto her shoulder, stormed past my sobbing mother, and marched out the front door, slamming it so hard the windows rattled in their frames. The toxic, fragile foundation of my family had been completely obliterated in less than 20 minutes. I stood next to my billionaire husband, holding my head incredibly high, watching my abusers drown in the catastrophic consequences of their own making. The call disconnected with a sharp, definitive click. The silence that instantly flooded my living room was so absolute, so suffocatingly heavy, that I could actually hear the rapid, shallow breathing coming from my father. Richard stood frozen in the center of the room, his eyes bulging out of his head as he stared at the cell phone resting on my glass coffee table. The arrogant, commanding patriarch who had stormed into my house just an hour ago was completely gone. In his place stood a terrified, trembling employee who had just realized he had commanded the ultimate boss of his entire corporate structure to commit a cybercrime. Marcus did not gloat. He did not raise his voice. He simply reached down, picked up his phone, and slid it back into the front pocket of his dark denim jeans. Then, with slow, deliberate movements, that commanded the attention of every single person in the room. He reached for the top button of his plain, unbranded black cardigan. He unfastened it, slipping the cheap garment off his broad shoulders and tossing it carelessly onto the back of my velvet armchair. Underneath that unassuming cardigan was a crisp, custom-tailored dress shirt that fit him with absolute perfection. He reached down to his left wrist and slowly rolled up the starched white cuff. The morning sunlight pouring through my living room windows caught the heavy brushed gold face of a limited edition Patek Philippe watch. It was a masterpiece of horology, a quiet, undeniable symbol of generational wealth that cost more than my parents' entire retirement portfolio. Brittany gasped out loud. Her greedy eyes locked onto the timepiece instantly. She knew exactly what that watch was, and the color violently drained from her pale face. Jamal swallowed hard, stepping backward as his own cheap, flashy suit suddenly looked like a pathetic costume. "Allow me to introduce myself properly," Marcus said. His voice was no longer the relaxed, accommodating tone of a new son-in-law trying to make a good impression. It was the cold, clinical, and ruthlessly authoritative voice of a boardroom titan. "My name is Marcus, and I am the founding partner and chairman of the board for Vanguard Holdings. That makes me the majority shareholder of the parent conglomerate that just acquired your financial firm, Richard." My father's knees physically buckled. He stumbled backward, the back of his legs hitting the edge of the sofa, and he collapsed heavily onto the cushions. He looked up at Marcus with an expression of pure, unadulterated horror. "You own Vanguard." Richard choked out his voice, cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched wheeze. "But you fix computers. You drive a standard sedan. Valerie said you were just a broke IT support worker." "Wealth whispers," Richard Marcus replied coldly. "Only broke men drowning in debt feel the desperate need to scream. I wore plain clothes to your family dinners because Naomi asked me to keep a low profile. But more importantly, I wanted to see exactly how this family operated when you thought no one important was watching. I wanted to see how you would treat a hardworking, ordinary black man who loved your daughter." Marcus took a slow step forward, towering over my father. "You failed that test spectacularly," he continued, his words slicing through the room like a perfectly sharpened blade. "Every single one of you showed your true colors. You abandoned your daughter on her wedding day to fund a luxury vacation for a son who contributes absolutely nothing to society. You broke into our home. You disrespected my wife under her own roof. You demanded I hack into a corporate server to save your fragile ego. You showed me exactly the kind of man you are, Richard, and it is not the kind of man I want representing my company." The terror in the living room was palpable. It hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Jamal stared at the floor, absolutely paralyzed by the realization that he had just demanded a second mortgage from a billionaire. His fake cryptocurrency entrepreneur persona was completely annihilated by the presence of true, effortless corporate power. Brittany stood completely still, her mind desperately calculating how she had so catastrophically misjudged the power dynamic in the room. But my mother Valerie possessed a level of shameless delusion that defied all human logic. As the reality of Marcus' massive net worth finally registered in her mind, her entire demeanor flipped with sickening speed. The cruel, judgmental matriarch, who had spent the entire morning belittling my public relations business and insulting my husband, completely vanished. She blinked rapidly, and suddenly a massive, brilliantly fake smile stretched across her face. Her eyes lit up with wild, opportunistic greed. She completely ignored the fact that her husband's career was currently imploding on the sofa next to her. All she saw was a billionaire son-in-law and a golden ticket back to the top of her church social hierarchy. "I knew it!" Valerie cried out joyfully, her voice pitching up into a sickeningly sweet melody. She leaped up from the sofa, holding her arms out wide as if she were greeting a returning war hero. "I always knew my beautiful daughter had a spectacular eye for men. Oh, my brilliant, wealthy son-in-law." She took a step toward Marcus, her designer heels clicking excitedly against the hardwood floor. "You must forgive us, Marcus. We were just joking around earlier. You know how our family is. We have a very tough love dynamic. We were just testing your boundaries to make sure you were strong enough to protect our precious Naomi." Valerie continued to walk forward, totally oblivious to the absolute disgust radiating from Marcus' face. That little party last month was so terribly rushed, she babbled enthusiastically, her hands reaching out to grab his shoulders. But now that we know who you really are, we can throw you to a proper lavish vow renewal. I will invite the entire congregation. Pastor Williams will be absolutely thrilled to host the chairman of Vanguard. Come here and give your mother-in-law a proper hug. She lunged forward to wrap her arms around his neck. I moved faster. I stepped directly between my husband and my mother, planting my feet firmly on the floor. I raised my hand and pressed my palm flat against Valerie's chest, stopping her forward momentum with a forceful, unyielding block. Do not touch him, I said. My voice was ice-cold, ringing with absolute terrifying finality. I stared directly into my mother's eyes, refusing to blink, refusing to back down. The days of me shrinking to accommodate her toxic pride were completely over. You do not get to disrespect my husband for an entire year, abandon me at the altar for a vacation, and then try to hug him, the very second you find out his net worth, I told her, keeping my hand pressed firmly against her collarbone. You do not get to claim my success when you spent my entire life setting me up to fail. Sit back down, Mom. Valerie recoiled as if my hand was burning hot. She gasped, her fake smile trembling violently as she stumbled backward. She looked at me in pure shock, finally realizing that the obedient, quiet scapegoat daughter she had bullied for 31 years was completely gone. In her place stood a woman holding all the power, and I had absolutely zero mercy left to give. Brittany watched my mother stumble backward, but her eyes quickly darted away from Valerie's humiliated face. She did not care about my mother's shattered pride or my father's impending corporate execution. Her mind had already calculated a brand new trajectory. The absolute audacity of this woman was a spectacle to behold. She stood up from the armchair, smoothing down her maternity blouse with a sudden, practiced elegance that made my skin crawl. She completely ignored Richard, who was still clutching his chest on the sofa, gasping for air as his prestigious career burned to ashes. She stepped right over my father's outstretched legs, as if he were nothing more than a discarded piece of trash on the sidewalk. She walked directly toward Marcus, her hips swaying deliberately, a predatory gleam shining brightly in her pale blue eyes. She was ready to sell out her entire marital family for a taste of real billionaire wealth. Marcus, wow, Brittany purred, her voice dripping with an artificial syrupy sweetness that made my stomach churn. She batted her eyelashes, tilting her head to expose her neck in a classic textbook display of gold-digging manipulation. I have to admit, you completely fooled us. A billionaire in disguise. That is so incredibly clever of you. You know, since you are the chairman of Vanguard Holdings, you must have an incredibly aggressive investment portfolio. I am actually launching a premium vegan makeup line specifically targeted at high net worth individuals. I have the entire business plan all mapped out in my head. I just need a tiny $5 million seed investment to get the manufacturing and marketing off the ground. She reached out, trying to playfully place her manicured hand on his tailored shirt sleeve. Family helps family, right, Marcus? Before Marcus could even react to her staggering entitlement, a sudden blur of cobalt blue rushed past me. Jamal had recovered from his initial shock, but instead of checking on his devastated father or defending his family honor, his own insatiable greed took the wheel. He practically sprinted across the living room, physically shoving his own pregnant wife out of the way to get closer to Marcus. Brittany let out a sharp gasp of indignation as she stumbled sideways into a side table, but Jamal did not even look back at her. The golden child was entirely focused on the billionaire standing in our foyer. Hold on a second! Marcus Jamal interjected, his voice frantic and breathless with pure desperation. Do not listen to a single word she says. Her makeup line is just a stupid hobby. My decentralized cryptocurrency exchange is the real deal. We are poised to disrupt the entire financial sector. Vanguard needs to diversify into digital assets to stay relevant in the modern market. You drop $5 million into my seed round right now, and I will make you an executive board member. We are family, man. We are brothers. You know I have the vision to take this to the moon. You just need to back my play. Dad job is irrelevant right now. We can build our own massive empire together. Richard let out a strangled, agonizing sound from the velvet sofa. He stared at his only son, the boy he had sacrificed everything for, the boy he had stolen for and lied for. Jamal had just casually declared his father career irrelevant in exchange for a theoretical crypto investment. Valerie clamped her hands over her ears, shutting her eyes tightly as the perfect, flawless image of her golden son shattered into a million filthy pieces. Jamal and Brittany began actively shouting over each other, snapping and snarling like starving dogs fighting over a scrap of meat. Brittany called Jamal a delusional scammer who blew all their money, while Jamal screamed that Brittany was nothing but a useless leech who contributed absolutely nothing to their marriage. They viciously tore each other apart in the middle of my living room, completely exposing their absolute lack of loyalty, love, or basic human decency. They did not care about Richard facing federal charges. They only cared about securing a new source of endless cash. Marcus did not entertain their pathetic, degrading performance. He did not laugh, he did not smile, and he certainly did not reach for his phone to authorize a bank transfer. He simply watched them with dark, unreadable eyes, studying their frantic greed like a scientist observing a highly predictable, incredibly disappointing experiment. He let them scream at each other until they finally ran out of breath, panting and staring at him with desperate, hungry expectation. Then, with slow, deliberate precision, Marcus turned his back on both of them. He walked calmly towards the wooden entryway bench, where he had set down his slim black leather briefcase when we first walked into the house. The entire room fell dead silent again, save for the heavy, labored breathing coming from my father. Marcus unfastened the brass locks of the briefcase. The sharp, metallic clicks echoed loudly in the quiet room. He did not pull out a checkbook. I did not pull out a luxury corporate pen. Marcus turned around, holding a thick, heavy manila folder. It was bound tightly and sealed securely with bright red tamper, evident security tape. He walked back to the center of the room, passing right between Jamal and Brittany, who were watching his hands with eager anticipation. Marcus stopped at the glass coffee table. He looked directly at my sister-in-law, his expression freezing over into a mask of pure, ruthless corporate execution. "I did not bring a checkbook to this little family reunion," Brittany, Marcus said, his voice dropping into a chilling, authoritative tone that commanded absolute terror. "I brought an internal audit report." With a swift, forceful motion, Marcus slammed the heavy, red-sealed folder down onto the glass coffee table. The resounding crack caused every single person in my family to flinch violently, sealing their inescapable fate. Marcus did not hesitate for a single second. He reached down and snapped the bright red security tape, tearing it straight down the middle. He flipped the heavy cardstock cover open, revealing a meticulously organized stack of financial documents, bank routing numbers, and highly classified corporate ledgers. The white pages glared against the dark glass of my coffee table. My father stared at the exposed papers as if they were venomous snakes ready to strike. The arrogant posture he had maintained for his entire life completely collapsed. His shoulders caved inward and his chest began to heave with rapid, shallow breaths. "I want to be perfectly clear about what happens next," Richard, Marcus said, his voice echoing in the dead silence of my living room. "I did not just stumble upon a few minor accounting errors. When I ordered the compliance team to look into your specific branch, they found a sophisticated, multi-layered embezzlement scheme. You have been actively stealing from Vanguard Holdings for over 24 months. My mother let out a high-pitched, strangled gasp, clutching her designer handbag against her chest. Jamal took another step backward, his back hitting the wall near the entryway. Brittany was completely frozen, her eyes darting frantically between her husband and the explosive documents on the table. "You used your senior managerial clearance to authorize massive payouts under the guise of high-tier client entertainment expenses." Marcus continued, picking up the top sheet of paper and holding it up for everyone to see. "You fabricated lavish corporate events, luxury executive retreats, and massive catering bills for high-net-worth clients who never actually attended a single dinner. And then you routed every single penny of those fraudulent expenses directly into two separate shell companies, Apex Digital Solutions and Crescent Crypto Investments." Marcus dropped the paper back onto the stack and looked directly at my older brother. "Both of those entities are registered under your exact name and your personal social security number, Jamal." Jamal's face drained of all color. He looked like he was going to be physically sick right there on my hardwood floor. The brilliant self-made entrepreneur narrative he had been aggressively selling to our entire family was completely obliterated in an instant. He was not a tech visionary. He was just a petty criminal living off his father's stolen corporate funds. $1.2 million. Marcus stated the massive number hitting the room with the force of a physical blow. That is exactly how much money you two stole from my company to fund Jamal's fake startup, his luxury downtown apartment, and Brittany's excessive shopping habits. You risked federal prison time just to maintain the absolute illusion of extreme wealth. Richard let out a loud, agonizing groan. His legs gave out completely. He fell forward off the edge of the velvet sofa, dropping heavily onto his knees. The loud thud of his kneecaps hitting the floor sent a shockwave through my own body, but I did not step forward to help him. I stood perfectly still, watching the man who had abandoned me at the altar grovel on my living room rug. "Marcus, please," Richard begged, his voice cracking as tears began to stream down his wrinkled face. I had to do it. Jamal was in so much debt. He promised me his crypto platform was going to take off. He swore he would pay back every single cent before the quarterly audits caught the discrepancies. I was just trying to give my son a chance to build a real family legacy. I am begging you, keep this quiet. I will sign whatever you want. I will forfeit my pension entirely. Just please do not ruin me. Valerie finally broke out of her paralyzed state. She let out a piercing, hysterical shriek that practically shattered the windows. It was the horrific, guttural sound of a woman realizing her entire universe was crashing down around her. She was not crying for my father. She was crying for herself. The realization hit her with absolute, unforgiving brutality. The beautiful, historic brownstone she bragged about to everyone was going to be seized. The expensive, tailored suits Richard wore to church every Sunday were gone. Her elite social status, the prestigious pastoral committees, the high society brunches, with the wealthy women who already looked down on her, it was all permanently destroyed. She was going to be known across the entire city as the wife of a disgraced, convicted embezzler. "We are going to lose everything," Valerie screamed, pulling at her own hair in pure, unadulterated panic. "The church is going to publicly excommunicate us. The bank will take the house. Where are we supposed to live, Richard? How could you be so incredibly stupid? You let Jamal talk you into ruining our lives." She turned her frantic, tear-streaked face toward me, her eyes wide with desperate, manipulative pleading. "Naomi, you have to talk to your husband. You have to make him stop this. We are your family. You cannot let him send your own father and your brother to federal prison. Our lives will be completely over." I looked down at my mother, feeling absolutely nothing but a cold, steady peace. "You ended your own lives, Mom," I said smoothly. "You spent years funding Jamal delusions while telling me my public relations firm was just a silly little hobby. You drained your legitimate savings to fly to Paris with Brittany, leaving my father with no safety net to replace the money he stole. You prioritized looking rich over actually being honest, and now the bill is finally due. I will not lift a single finger to save you." Marcus stepped around the glass coffee table, looking down at my father with eyes completely devoid of mercy. He did not care about Valerie screaming or Jamal panicked hyperventilating. He was operating purely as a corporate titan executing a flawless termination. "I am not here to negotiate a payment plan," Richard Marcus said, his voice dropping into a lethal, commanding frequency. "Exactly 24 hours to submit your formal letter of resignation to Sterling Crawford. You will state personal health reasons, and you will waive any and all rights to severance packages or corporate benefits." Richard choked on a sob, nodding his head rapidly as he continued to kneel on the floor. Yes, I will resign today. I will do whatever you want. But resignation is just the very first step." Marcus continued, his tone turning even colder. "You will also return the entire $1.2 million. Every single missing penny must be wired directly back into the Vanguard Holdings corporate accounts by 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. If that money is not sitting in my ledger by the time the banks open, I am taking this red folder along with every single routing number, fake invoice, and digital footprint you and your son created. I will personally hand-deliver it to the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Wire fraud carries a 20-year federal sentence, Richard. The clock is ticking." The devastating reality of federal prison finally fractured the fragile, toxic loyalty my family had used to abuse me for decades. Jamal did not rush to comfort our hyperventilating mother. He did not reach down to help our father off the hardwood floor. Instead, he turned his absolute panic into a weapon and aimed it directly at the man who had just destroyed his own life to fund him. "You told me those accounts were completely untraceable," Jamal screamed. His voice cracked, echoing loudly against the high ceilings of my living room. "You swore to me that Vanguard never audited those specific regional ledgers. You promised me the audit software would never flag the offshore routing numbers. You swore that the money was circulating cleanly through your ridiculous digital ledger. You are a senior branch manager, Dad. How could you be so incredibly sloppy? You left a massive paper trail leading right to my doorstep. You set me up to take the fall for your sheer incompetence." Richard scrambled up from the floor. His face shifted from pure terror to a dark, violent shade of purple. The patriarch who demanded absolute perfection from me had completely lost his mind. Richard lunged forward and slapped Jamal across the face with a loud, vicious crack that temporarily silenced my mother crying. "I ruined my entire professional career for you," Richard roared, spit flying from his lips as he pointed a shaking finger at his golden child. "I believed your lies because your mother begged me to support your vision. I risked 20 years in federal prison because you kept begging for more seed money to impress your greedy wife. You are the one who left the corporate credit card linked to your personal expenses. You are the one who approved the fake entertainment invoices. You told me your crypto platform was going to go public. You told me you would pay back every single cent before the quarterly reviews. You are a worthless, pathetic leech who cannot even hold down a real job. I gave you everything and you destroyed my life." While the two men shoved each other and screamed vicious insults across my living room, Brittany finally woke up from her gold-digging delusion. She looked at the red-sealed folder resting on my glass coffee table, and the reality of federal prosecution finally registered in her mind. The undeniable truth hit her like a bucket of ice water. There was no startup empire. There was no seed funding. The massive, generational wealth she thought she married into was nothing but a criminal illusion funded by stolen corporate cash. Her lavish Paris vacations, her custom designer nursery, and her luxury shopping sprees were completely dead. Her designer lifestyle, the country club memberships, she bragged about the exclusive private school waitlists she had already joined for her unborn child. All of it evaporated into thin air. She was not the wealthy elite matriarch she envisioned. She was just the pregnant wife of an unemployed, soon-to-be convicted felon. The Golden Goose was heading to federal prison, and her husband was going to be completely broke. Her survival instincts kicked into overdrive. She did not try to separate her husband and her father-in-law. She ignored Valerie, who was now weeping openly on the velvet sofa. Instead, Brittany frantically spun around and darted toward my custom-built entertainment center. She grabbed my expensive smart tablet off the charging dock and shoved it violently into her oversized designer tote bag. I could see her calculating the exact pawn value of my electronics. She needed liquid cash to fund her escape plan, and she felt entirely entitled to take it from my home. Then she reached for a priceless hand-painted ceramic sculpture Marcus had bought for me during our first anniversary trip to Italy. She was actively trying to steal whatever high-value items she could carry to pawn later. I marched across the living room with lightning speed. I clamped my hand down on her wrist with a vice-like grip before her fingers could close around the ceramic sculpture. She let out a sharp gasp of surprise, but I did not loosen my hold. My fingers dug into her pale skin. She tried to yank her arm away, but I held on with the absolute strength of a woman who had finally stopped playing the victim. "Drop my things right this second," I said, my voice dropping into a low, lethal whisper. "You do not get to walk into my house, insult. My husband demand a $5 million investment and then rob me blind on your way out. If you take one more step toward my front door with my tablet in your bag, I will have the police arrest you for burglary before your husband even makes it to his federal arraignment. Empty your bag, Brittany. Now." Brittany ripped her arm out of my grasp, her chest heaving with panicked, erratic breaths. She reached into her tote bag, pulled out my smart tablet, and slammed it down onto the wooden console table. Her face was contorted with an ugly, venomous rage that stripped away every single layer of her fake, polite suburban housewife smile. The mask fell off, revealing the vile, entitled racist she had always been hiding. I knew I should never have married into a family of black frauds, Brittany spat. Her voice dripped with unchecked racial contempt. I knew it the second I met all of you. You people are nothing but ghetto scammers trying to play rich. You pretend to be this high-class, respectable family, but underneath the tailored suits and the church choir solos, you are just a bunch of street-level thieves. I sacrificed my own social standing to marry into this mess, because Jamal promised me a luxury lifestyle. I am not going down with a bunch of common criminals who cannot even execute a simple white-collar crime without getting caught. I am taking my baby, and I am leaving. Jamal stopped fighting with his father. He slowly turned around, his eyes wide with absolute staggering shock. He stared at the woman he had spent hundreds of thousands of stolen dollars trying to please. He had abandoned his only sister on her wedding day just to ensure Brittany could shop for Chanel baby clothes in Paris. He had happily watched his parents drain their entire retirement savings just to keep a smile on her entitled face. And now, at the very first sign of financial ruin, she was stripping away his humanity and reducing him to a disgusting racist stereotype right to his face. The trophy wife he had bought with embezzled money had just called him a fraud and thrown a racial slur at his entire bloodline. Jamal opened his mouth, but absolutely no words came out. Later that evening, the chaotic energy of our townhouse felt like a distant memory compared to the smooth, sophisticated atmosphere of the Blue Note Jazz Lounge downtown. Marcus sat perfectly still in a secluded leather booth situated in the dimly lit back corner of the club. A heavy crystal glass of aged bourbon rested on the polished mahogany table in front of him. A live saxophone player filled the room with a slow, mournful melody. Marcus checked his limited edition watch. It was exactly 9 o'clock. His phone had buzzed 2 hours earlier with a frantic, desperate text message from an unknown number. The sender begged for a highly confidential meeting, promising to deliver the exact evidence needed to bury Richard and Jamal permanently. The heavy velvet curtain near the entrance was pushed aside, and Brittany hurried into the lounge. She had completely abandoned her arrogant, wealthy housewife persona. She wore a dark trench coat pulled tightly over her maternity clothes, a silk scarf wrapped high around her neck, and oversized designer sunglasses that she quickly shoved into her purse. She looked over her shoulder twice, her eyes darting around the room in absolute paranoia to make sure Jamal had not followed her. When she spotted Marcus sitting in the shadows, she practically sprinted across the carpeted floor and slid into the booth directly across from him. Marcus did not offer her a drink. He did not even offer her a polite greeting. He simply took a slow sip of his bourbon, letting the burning liquid coat his throat, and waited for the gold digger to start negotiating her treason. "I cannot stay long," Brittany whispered breathlessly, leaning over the table so no one else could hear her. "Jamal is currently tearing the guest room apart looking for his passports, and Richard is locked in his home office crying on the phone with a defense attorney. It is a complete madhouse over there. They are entirely focused on saving themselves, which gives me exactly 10 minutes to secure my own future." Marcus set his glass down. "You texted me claiming you had something of extreme value." Marcus said, his voice flat and clinical. "I am a very busy man, Brittany. I am only sitting in this booth because I prefer to eliminate corporate liabilities as quickly as possible. Speak." Brittany swallowed hard. She shifted her posture, dropping her shoulders and widening her pale blue eyes in a calculated attempt to look completely innocent and terrified. She was intentionally weaponizing her tears, trying to play the classic role of the helpless white woman who had been viciously deceived by a corrupt black family. "You have to believe me," Marcus Brittany pleaded, her voice trembling with artificial sincerity. "I had absolutely no idea where the money was coming from. Jamal lied to me from the very first day we met. He told me he was a venture capitalist. He manipulated my trust and trapped me in this marriage with a baby. I am just an innocent victim in their disgusting little crime ring. You heard how they treated Naomi all those years. They are a family of manipulative liars, and I was just another one of their targets." Marcus stared at her, his face an impenetrable mask. He knew exactly who and what Brittany was. She was a remorseless parasite who had gladly spent stolen money to fund her luxury trips to Paris, while constantly throwing racist insults at the very people keeping a roof over her head. But Marcus was a master negotiator, and in the world of high finance, You always let the desperate party hang themselves with their own words. Fascinating story, Marcus replied dryly. But victimhood is not a tradable asset. What exactly are you bringing to my table to negotiate? Brittany leaned even closer, her greed completely overpowering her fake tears. I know exactly how Jamal set up the shell companies, she said, her voice dropping into an eager conspiratorial whisper. I know the names of the offshore accounts. I know the exact passwords to his encrypted digital wallets, where he tried to hide the cryptocurrency he bought with Richard embezzled cash. I have been quietly taking pictures of his ledger screens while he was asleep. I have everything you need to trace every single missing penny. She paused, letting the magnitude of her betrayal settle in the air. And it gets better, she continued, a cruel smirk, breaking through her innocent facade. If you press federal charges, I will gladly stand up in open court and testify against my own father-in-law. I will swear under oath that Richard openly bragged about stealing from Vanguard Holdings at Sunday family dinners. I will be your star witness, Marcus. I will hand you their heads on a silver platter completely gift-wrapped with a pretty little bow. Marcus leaned back against the plush leather seat. He steepled his fingers together, watching the pregnant woman gleefully plot the total annihilation of her husband and his father. What is your price, Brittany? I want $500,000 in clean, untraceable cash deposited into a private account by midnight, Brittany demanded, her eyes shining with pure, unchecked avarice. Jamal is going to be completely broke and locked in a federal penitentiary, and I am not raising my child in poverty. $500,000 is incredibly cheap for the kind of ironclad evidence I am handing you. Pay me, and I will disappear tonight. I will start a brand new life for my baby, far away from those black frauds. And you can finally throw Richard in a cage where he belongs. Marcus picked up his bourbon glass. He swirled the amber liquid, watching the ice clink against the crystal. He looked at the greedy racist woman sitting across from him with a level of absolute disgust that would have terrified a smarter person. But Marcus just smiled. It was a cold, sharp, and terrifyingly brilliant smile. You want $500,000 to sell out your husband and his father? Marcus said smoothly, his tone remarkably agreeable. That is a very reasonable price for total corporate victory. Consider it a deal. Brittany let out a massive sigh of relief, her shoulders sagging as she believed she had just outsmarted a billionaire. But we have strict compliance protocols at Vanguard, Marcus continued, keeping his eyes locked on her face. I need you to state your terms clearly and explicitly so my legal team can process the settlement agreement. I need to know exactly what you are selling and exactly why you are leaving Jamal, just so the contract is airtight. Absolutely, Brittany agreed eagerly, completely blinded by the promise of wealth. Marcus casually rested his arms on the mahogany table. He discreetly slid his cell phone just a few inches closer to her side of the booth. The screen was black, but the microphone was perfectly positioned. Go ahead, Brittany, Marcus said softly. Tell me exactly how much you hate them. Brittany leaned across the polished mahogany table, completely unaware that her entire racist monologue was being recorded in pristine high-definition audio. She smiled, her pale blue eyes gleaming with absolute malice. Oh, I hate them, Marcus. I loathe them. I spent 3 years pretending to respect Richard and Valerie, acting like I enjoyed their overly loud Sunday dinners and their tedious self-righteous church gossip. But the truth is, these black fools actually thought they were incredibly smart. They thought they were building some kind of elite corporate dynasty. They are just a bunch of ghetto scammers wearing expensive suits. Jamal is nothing but my personal ATM. He is weak, he is incredibly stupid, and he is easily manipulated. I only married him because Richard promised me a luxury lifestyle. Now that the embezzled money is gone, Jamal is entirely useless to me. Deposit $500,000 into my private account by midnight, and I will give you every single offshore routing number. Pay me, and I will happily bury them all in federal court without a second thought. Brittany sat back against the leather seat, crossing her arms with a deeply satisfied smirk. She picked up her designer purse and slid out of the booth. She walked out of the high-end jazz lounge with a triumphant, arrogant bounce in her step, absolutely convinced she had just outsmarted a billionaire. Marcus waited until the heavy velvet curtain fell closed behind her. He picked up his phone, stopped the audio recording, and forwarded the digital file directly to his legal team. The trap was perfectly set. and the execution was going to be completely flawless. The next morning arrived with a heavy, suffocating tension. It was officially deadline day. Richard had exactly 2 hours left to wire the stolen $1.2 million back to Vanguard Holdings, or his federal prosecution would officially begin. At 7 in the morning, my phone rang. It was not a call of surrender. It was a desperate, highly calculated summons from my mother. Valerie had organized an emergency family healing meeting at her massive, opulent megachurch. It was her absolute last resort. She knew she could not intimidate Marcus with corporate threats, so she fell back on the only weapon she had left to manipulate me: religious guilt and communal shame. Marcus and I pulled into the sprawling parking lot of the Greater Faith Cathedral. It was an enormous multi-million-dollar facility where my mother derived her entire social identity and masked her toxic behavior behind a veil of extreme piety. We walked through the heavy glass doors and made our way into the expansive, beautifully decorated sanctuary. The room was empty, save for a small circle of plush chairs positioned directly in front of the main altar. Valerie, Richard, and Jamal sat together, looking like a trio of devastated innocent victims facing an unjust trial. Jamal was frantically biting his nails, his leg bouncing up and down. Richard looked like he had not slept in a week, his skin a pale, sickly gray. Brittany was noticeably absent, presumably waiting at a hotel for her extortion money to clear. Sitting at the head of the circle was Pastor Davis. He wore a sharp, custom-tailored suit and held a large, leather-bound Bible in his hands. Valerie had clearly given him a heavily edited, highly dramatized version of events, painting me as the rebellious, cruel daughter who was withholding my billionaire husband's wealth, while my righteous father faced a minor, easily fixable financial misunderstanding caused by a simple accounting error. Naomi Marcus, Pastor Davis, said, his voice booming with practiced theatrical authority as we approached the altar. "Please sit down. We are gathered here today in the house of the Lord to heal a broken family. The enemy is trying to divide this beautiful household over temporary worldly finances, but we will not let darkness win today." We did not sit down. Marcus stood firmly beside me, his hands resting comfortably in his pockets, projecting an aura of untouchable quiet power. I stood tall, looking directly at my mother, whose face was buried in a tissue as she forced out fake dramatic sobs meant to gain the pastor's sympathy. Pastor Davis closed his eyes and raised his hands toward the high vaulted ceiling. He launched into a long, incredibly manipulative prayer. "Lord, we ask you to soften Naomi's heart today. We ask you to remind her of the sacred commandment to honor her father and her mother. We pray that she realizes family is a sacred bond that must be protected at all costs. Lord, bless this family with the spirit of absolute forgiveness. Touch Naomi and Marcus so they may willingly cover this financial burden. Clearing Richard's name so he may continue to lead this family in your righteous light. We rebuke the spirit of greed and stubbornness within this younger generation. We pray for immediate financial deliverance from the pockets of those you have blessed with massive abundance." The pastor went on and on, shamelessly twisting his spiritual authority to justify my father, massive corporate embezzlement. He was actively trying to shame me into writing a check for over $1 million. He framed my refusal to pay a criminal debt as a deep sin against God and family. Valerie cried louder, shouting an enthusiastic amen every time the pastor mentioned forgiveness and financial deliverance. Jamal kept his head bowed, playing the role of the humble, repentant son who just needed a second chance. I did not flinch. I did not break eye contact with my mother. I let the pastor finish his deeply offensive extortionist prayer. I let his final amen echo through the massive, empty sanctuary. The silence that followed was thick with heavy expectation. Valerie wiped her dry eyes and looked at me with eager, demanding anticipation. She genuinely believed this ridiculous church performance was going to work. She thought the presence of her powerful pastor would force me to submit to her will and command Marcus to empty his bank accounts. I reached into my designer tote bag. I pulled out Marcus' cell phone, which he had handed to me in the car ride over. "Pastor," I said, my voice ringing clear, calm, and absolutely unbothered through the quiet church. "You speak beautifully about forgiving our parents and honoring family. But before I write a check to save these people, I think you should hear how this family truly operates. The heavy wooden doors at the back of the sanctuary suddenly swung open with a loud thud. The bright morning light spilled into the center aisle, framing the silhouette of a woman marching purposefully toward the altar. It was Brittany. She had grown entirely too impatient waiting in her cheap motel room for the extortion money to clear. She strutted down the carpeted aisle, clutching her designer purse, completely oblivious to the solemn, desperate atmosphere she was interrupting. She locked eyes with Marcus, flashing a greedy, conspiratorial smile. She actually thought he had summoned the family here to quietly hand her a duffel bag full of untraceable cash. Brittany stopped just a few feet away from the altar, glaring at Jamal with absolute contempt before turning her eager attention back to my husband. Well, Brittany demanded, crossing her arms over her maternity blouse. I held up my end of the bargain by keeping quiet all morning. Are we finalizing the transaction or what? I have a flight booked for noon and I need that money wired right now. Valerie gasped, clutching her chest. Pastor Davis looked completely bewildered by the sudden intrusion of a pregnant white woman, aggressively demanding cash in front of his pulpit. Jamal stood up from his chair, his brow furrowed in deep confusion. Transaction. Jamal echoed, his voice shaking. Brittany, what are you talking about? Why are you asking him for money? Marcus did not answer Jamal. He simply reached into his pocket, pulled out his smartphone, and walked directly over to the expensive state-of-the-art soundboard resting near the choir stands. He tapped the screen a few times effortlessly, pairing his device to the megachurch massive Bluetooth speaker system. He did not say a single word. He just pressed play. Brittany's voice instantly boomed through the cavernous sanctuary. The high-definition audio echoed off the stained glass windows, and the high vaulted ceilings amplifying her vile racist extortion plot for everyone to hear. Oh, I hate them, Marcus. I loathe them. The recording of Brittany blared through the church speakers, her tone dripping with toxic, unhinged arrogance. I spent 3 years pretending to respect Richard and Valerie, acting like I enjoyed their overly loud Sunday dinners and their tedious, self-righteous church gossip. But the truth is, these black fools actually thought they were incredibly smart. They are just a bunch of ghetto scammers wearing expensive suits. Valerie let out a blood-curdling shriek. She threw her hands over her face, completely destroyed by the sheer racial contempt spewing from the daughter-in-law she had blindly worshipped and defended over her own flesh and blood. Pastor Davis physically recoiled, stepping back from the altar, as if the ground beneath him had caught fire. The recording continued to play mercilessly, exposing every single layer of Brittany betrayal. Jamal is nothing but my personal ATM. He is weak, he is incredibly stupid, and he is easily manipulated. Deposit $500,000 into my private account by midnight, and I will happily bury them all in federal court without a second thought. Marcus casually pressed a button on his screen to stop the audio. The resulting silence in the church was deafening, suffocating, and absolutely lethal. Brittany's face lost all its color. The smug, entitled grin vanished entirely, replaced by a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. She stumbled backward, looking around wildly as she realized she had just walked straight into a brilliantly executed trap. She had openly confessed to extortion, racial hatred, and gold digging right into the microphone of a billionaire. Jamal completely lost his mind. The carefully constructed illusion of his perfect, successful life shattered violently. He let out a raw, agonizing roar of pure fury and lunged directly at his wife. He closed the distance between them in 2 massive strides, his hands balled into tight fists at his sides. Pastor Davis shouted for order, rushing forward to physically block Jamal from reaching her, but the damage was already permanently done. "You sold me out!" Jamal screamed, his voice cracking with absolute devastation and rage. "I stole for you. I risked federal prison to buy you designer bags and fund your luxury lifestyle because you constantly threatened to leave me if I did not provide. You called my family a bunch of fools and then tried to extort a billionaire to leave me with nothing. I want a divorce today. I am filing the paperwork the second I leave this building." Cornered and completely exposed, Brittany dropped her innocent victim act entirely. The terrified, manipulative tears disappeared. She stood her ground, her face contorting into an ugly, venomous sneer. She screamed right back at the man she had used for years. "Go ahead and file, Jamal!" Brittany shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly across the empty pews. You are a broke, pathetic loser anyway. You have absolutely no money, no startup, and no future. You used stolen corporate cash to buy my affection because you knew a woman like me would never settle for a failure like you otherwise. Go ahead and divorce me. I am taking the cars, I am taking the luxury apartment, and I am taking every single asset you have left in alimony and child support. You will be paying me for the rest of your miserable life while you rot in a federal cell. While Brittany stood proudly demanding the spoils of her fraudulent marriage, a low, dark sound began to rumble from the front row. It was a laugh, a broken, unhinged, deeply terrifying laugh. Everyone turned to look at my father. Richard was sitting hunched over in his plush church chair, his shoulders shaking with dark, cynical amusement. He slowly lifted his head, locking his bloodshot, exhausted eyes onto his daughter-in-law. The sheer malice in his gaze made Brittany take a nervous step backward. Take what Richard laughed, his voice raspy and devoid of any remaining sanity. Take the cars. Take the apartment. You absolute unbelievable idiot. Richard stood up slowly, pointing a shaking finger directly at Brittany's pale face. He was a man who had already lost everything, which meant he had absolutely no mercy left to give. You think you are walking away from this family with a massive payout? Richard spat, taking a step toward her. I am a senior financial manager, Brittany. I deal with risk assessment for a living. You really think I was going to let my son marry a woman who demanded a luxury lifestyle without securing his assets first? I drafted your prenuptial agreement myself. I wrote every single line of that contract before you walked down the aisle. Brittany crossed her arms, trying to maintain her arrogant posture, but her hands were visibly shaking. The prenup guarantees me half of everything acquired during the marriage, she shot back defensively. My lawyer reviewed it. Your lawyer was an idiot who did not read the fine print. Richard roared, his voice booming with the last shred of authority he possessed. I buried an ironclad morality clause and a strict fraud stipulation on page 47. The contract explicitly states that if you commit any act of extortion, financial fraud against the family, or publicly disgrace the household, the entire agreement is completely voided in our favor. And Marcus just played a high-definition recording of you actively committing federal extortion and admitting to marrying my son strictly for fraudulent financial gain. Richard smiled, a cold, ruthless expression that sealed her absolute ruin. You broke the morality clause, Brittany. The prenup is triggered. You get absolutely nothing. No alimony, no luxury apartment, no cars, no designer bags. The bank is seizing all the assets tomorrow anyway to pay back the money I embezzled. You leave this marriage exactly the way you entered it. Completely broke. You are leaving with nothing but the clothes on your back. A sound of pure, unadulterated horror ripped from Brittany's throat. She let out a piercing, agonizing scream that echoed off the stained glass windows, finally realizing she had destroyed her own life for absolutely nothing. Brittany let out a piercing, agonizing scream that echoed off the stained glass windows. The absolute reality of her situation crashed down on her with the force of a falling building. She looked at Jamal, who was staring back at her with pure, unadulterated hatred. She looked at Richard, who was smiling that dark, cynical smile of a man who had already lost his own soul. There was no $500,000 extortion payout waiting for her. There was no luxury downtown apartment to claim in the divorce settlement. There was no alimony to fund her vegan makeup line. Because of the strict morality clause she had just violently breached on a high-definition audio recording, she was legally entitled to absolutely 0 cents of the embezzled empire she had married into. Brittany clutched her stolen designer purse against her chest, as if it were a life preserver on a sinking ship. Her face was bright red, flushed with a mixture of profound embarrassment and utter defeat. She spun around on her expensive heels and sprinted down the center aisle of the church. She burst through the heavy wooden doors and ran out into the parking lot, leaving the shattered remains of her fraudulent marriage behind her forever. Jamal collapsed into the nearest church pew, burying his face in his hands. The golden child was entirely broken. His fake cryptocurrency startup was dead. His trophy wife had just exposed her vicious racism and abandoned him. He was facing federal indictment, and he had absolutely no one to blame but himself. The massive sanctuary fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. Pastor Davis stood frozen near the choir stands, clutching his leather-bound Bible, his eyes wide with sheer disbelief. The holy intervention he had been manipulated into hosting had transformed into a brutal corporate execution right in front of his altar. He slowly stepped backward, distancing himself entirely from the toxic implosion of my family, unwilling to attach his pastoral reputation to a massive federal embezzlement scandal. The reality of the ticking clock finally set in for my parents. It was past 8 in the morning. Richard had less than an hour to wire $1.2 million back to Vanguard Holdings, or Marcus was handing that red-sealed folder directly to the federal authorities. Richard's knees gave out completely. The proud, arrogant financial manager who had constantly belittled my career choices dropped physically to the carpeted floor. He crawled forward on his hands and knees, dragging himself toward where Marcus and I stood. Valerie let out a loud, dramatic wail and threw herself onto the floor right next to her disgraced husband. My parents, the two people who had prioritized looking rich over being honest. The two people who had abandoned me on my wedding day to fund a luxury vacation for their scammer son, were now literally kneeling on the floor in front of the church altar begging for mercy. "Naomi, please," Valerie sobbed, grabbing the hem of my dress with her trembling hands. Her fake church-going facade was completely destroyed, leaving behind a desperate, terrified woman facing absolute social and financial ruin. "Please, you have to save us. You have to tell your husband to forgive the debt. We will do whatever you want. We will apologize publicly. We will go to counseling. Just tell Marcus to drop the audit." I looked down at the woman who gave birth to me, feeling absolutely no pity. I stepped backward, forcing her to let go of my clothes. "You do not want forgiveness, Mom," I said, my voice ringing clear and cold through the empty church. "You just want a bailout. You are not sorry for treating me like an outcast my entire life. You are only sorry that the man you insulted turned out to be the billionaire holding your husband federal indictment." Valerie frantically wiped her tear-streaked face, smearing her expensive makeup. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with that familiar toxic manipulation. "Naomi, you are our only daughter," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "We gave you life. We raised you. You owe us for everything we sacrificed to put a roof over your head. You cannot let your father go to a federal penitentiary. Your little public relations business cannot possibly cover $1 million debt, but Marcus can. He has billions. 1.2 million is pocket change to him. Make him wire the money right now. Save your family, Naomi." Even now, kneeling on the floor facing total annihilation, my mother still could not bring herself to respect me. She still viewed me as the helpless scapegoat who needed a wealthy man to save the day. She still referred to my highly successful corporate crisis management agency as a little public relations business. She genuinely believed I was just a very lucky girl who managed to marry a billionaire, and that my only value was my proximity to his massive wealth. Richard clasped his hands together, looking up at me with pathetic, bloodshot eyes. "Please, Naomi," he begged, his voice a harsh, raspy whisper. "Tell Marcus to forgive the money. Save my life today." I did not look at Marcus. I did not need to ask my husband for permission to handle the people who had abused me for 3 decades. I stood perfectly straight, radiating a quiet, terrifying power that my parents had never seen from me before. I reached into my designer tote bag. I bypassed my cell phone, my wallet, and my keys. My fingers closed around the smooth, thick spine of a fresh, glossy magazine. I pulled it out of my bag and held it up. I did not hand it to my mother. I raised my right arm and deliberately slammed the heavy publication down onto the polished wooden surface of the front church pew with a resounding, violent crack that echoed loudly all the way up to the high vaulted ceilings. My father flinched violently as the glossy pages slid across the smooth mahogany wood. Valerie stared at the object as if it were a live explosive device waiting to detonate. The sprawling sanctuary remained deadly quiet. I did not say a single word. I simply waited for their wide, panicked eyes to adjust to the bold, pristine lettering printed directly across the top of the cover. It was the latest issue of Forbes magazine. Right there in the exact center of the page, staring back at my kneeling parents, was a high-definition portrait of me. I was wearing a sharp-tailored power suit, sitting in a sleek glass boardroom with my arms crossed, projecting absolute, unapologetic authority. Printed in stark white letters across the bottom of my designer heels was the main headline. Naomi, the public relations fixer for the ultra-rich. Richard blinked rapidly, his mouth opening and closing silently like a suffocating fish. Valerie let out a short, breathless gasp. Her hands hovered over the magazine, completely terrified to physically touch it. She looked from the glossy cover to my face and then back to the cover again. Her brain simply could not process the undeniable visual evidence sitting right in front of her. For 31 years, she had meticulously crafted a toxic narrative where I was the struggling, pathetic daughter who threw silly little parties for a living. She had constantly belittled my business to her elite church friends to make herself feel vastly superior. Now she was staring at her own flesh and blood on the cover of the most prestigious financial publication in the entire world. "You asked me to beg my billionaire husband to save you from your own colossal stupidity," I said, my voice slicing through the heavy church air like a freshly sharpened blade. "You knelt on this carpet and begged me to use Marcus' wealth because you genuinely believe my business is nothing but a cute little hobby. You think I am just a lucky girl who managed to secure a rich man to elevate her status." I took a slow, deliberate step closer, looking down at the pathetic people who had abandoned me at the altar. "I never needed my husband money, Mom. I have been a self-made multimillionaire for 3 entire years." Jamal let out a loud, choked sound from the pew behind us. His eyes were bulging out of his head. The older brother who had constantly demanded I take out a second mortgage on my townhouse to fund his fake cryptocurrency lifestyle was currently staring at the sister who could buy his entire existence 10 times over without breaking a sweat. The golden child was entirely eclipsed. "You want to know how Marcus and I actually met?" I continued, holding my head incredibly high. "I did not meet him by fixing his Wi-Fi router, and he did not sweep me off my feet to save me from poverty." 8 months ago, Vanguard Holdings faced a massive public relations crisis when a former executive leaked highly sensitive financial data. The board of directors panicked. They needed the absolute best crisis management firm in the country to protect their global stock valuation. They did not hire a massive corporate conglomerate. They hired my boutique agency. I negotiated a $10 million corporate rebranding contract directly with Vanguard. I met Marcus in the executive boardroom because I was the lead strategist hired to save his company public image. Valerie began to violently shake. The tears streaming down her face were no longer fake manipulative tears meant to garner sympathy from Pastor Davis. They were tears of pure, unadulterated devastation. Her entire worldview was violently collapsing around her. The daughter she had treated like absolute garbage was a corporate titan. She had spent the last decade worshipping her golden child son, funding his fake extravagant lifestyle, defending his blatant corporate theft, and prioritizing his manipulative racist white wife. She had drained her own legitimate savings to buy Jamal a first-class ticket to Paris, while the daughter she abandoned was quietly sitting on an empire. "If you had this kind of money?" Valerie whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of her massive, profound regret. "Why did you never tell us?" "We were struggling. Jamal needed investors. We are your family, Naomi. Why did you hide this from us?" "I hid my wealth because I know exactly who you people are," I replied, my tone completely devoid of any warmth or mercy. "I watched you enable Jamal's toxic greed my entire life. I knew the second you found out about my corporate success, you would demand unlimited access to my bank accounts. You would have used my hard-earned money to fund Britney designer bags and Jamal luxury apartments. You would have paraded my success around this megachurch to boost your own arrogant social standing while still treating me like dirt behind closed doors. Keeping my wealth a secret was the absolute only way to protect my peace from your insatiable toxic greed." Richard bowed his head, his forehead resting against the edge of the wooden pew. The arrogant financial manager was completely broken, realizing he had embezzled corporate funds and destroyed his own freedom when his own daughter possessed the legal capital to fund 10 legitimate businesses. Pastor Davis silently backed away from the altar, recognizing the absolute sheer wickedness of the family he had just tried to blindly defend. I reached back into my designer tote bag one final time. I pulled out a thick, stapled stack of printed financial ledgers. I tossed the heavy stack of papers right on top of the Forbes magazine. Those are the bank statements detailing every single car payment, every single rent check, and every single grocery bill I secretly covered for this family. Over the last 3 years, I stated, watching Valerie's eyes widen as she looked at the highlighted numbers. I kept the roof over your head. I kept the electricity running while you threw thousands of dollars at Jamal's fake startup. You stood in this church today and told me I owed you for giving me life. You tried to use religious guilt to force me to pay for a federal crime. I leaned down, bringing my face inches from my mother, terrified, tear-streaked face. I do not owe you life, Valerie, I said, my voice radiating absolute chilling finality. I bought it back. The words hung in the vast sanctuary, heavy and absolute. Valerie stared at the highlighted ledger, her trembling fingers hovering over the glossy pages, documenting every single time my hard-earned money had saved her from eviction and total ruin. The grand illusion she had spent decades meticulously constructing was entirely dead. There was no more wealthy matriarch ruling the church committees. There was no more golden child building a corporate empire. There was only the undeniable, humiliating truth printed in black and white. Jamal let out a pathetic, suffocating sob from the wooden pew behind us. The older brother, who had constantly demanded I take out second mortgages and fund his fake cryptocurrency startup, was now curled into a tight ball, weeping like a terrified child. He looked at Richard, waiting for the patriarch to magically fix the situation, but Richard was completely paralyzed. My father remained on his knees, his expensive custom-tailored suit wrinkling against the church carpet, his eyes darting frantically between me and Marcus. He opened his mouth desperately, trying to formulate one last manipulative excuse, one final plea to my sense of familial duty. "Naomi, please," Richard begged, his voice cracking into a pathetic, raspy whisper that echoed poorly in the empty megachurch. "We are your blood. You cannot just leave us here to face federal prosecutors. We will lose absolutely everything today. The bank will seize the historic brownstone by Friday. I will be completely ruined. You have the immense power to stop this right now. You have the millions to make this nightmare completely disappear." I looked down at the man who had always treated my career as a joke, the man who skipped giving me away at the altar to sip champagne in first class with his fraudulent son. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. I felt entirely wonderfully free. "I am not paying your debt," I stated, my voice radiating across the empty church pews with unyielding authority. "My husband is not forgiving your massive corporate embezzlement. You made the deliberate choice to steal over $1 million to fund a lifestyle you could not afford, and you made the deliberate choice to abandon me on my wedding day. You do not get to cash in on my success when you actively contributed to my pain for 31 years. I reached down and picked up my designer tote bag, sliding the leather strap smoothly over my shoulder. "My only free public relations advice to you is to find a very good criminal defense attorney. And you better find one before 5 o'clock today, because Marcus is not bluffing." Valerie let out a blood-curdling scream, throwing herself forward and attempting to grab my ankles in a final act of desperation. Marcus stepped in effortlessly, positioning his solid frame between me and the toxic woman who had birthed me. He did not say a word to her. He simply gave her a look of such absolute chilling disgust that she immediately recoiled, pulling her hands back as if she had touched a hot stove. Marcus turned to me, his dark eyes softening instantly into a gaze of pure protective love. He held out his hand. "Are you ready to go home, my beautiful wife?" he asked, his voice steady and incredibly warm. I smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that completely illuminated my face. I placed my hand firmly inside his. "I am entirely ready," I replied. We turned our backs on my kneeling parents and my weeping brother. We began to walk down the center aisle of the megachurch together. The symbolism was incredibly profound. Just a few weeks prior, I had walked down a different aisle, heartbroken by their absence, but saved by the grace of chosen family. Now I was walking down this aisle holding the hand of my powerful, supportive husband, leaving the toxic, parasitic blood relatives behind in the dust where they truly belonged. We did not look back, not even once. As we walked toward the heavy wooden exit doors, I glanced over at Pastor Davis. The man who had tried to use religious guilt to extort me for $1 million was standing rigidly by the choir stands. He looked down at Valerie and Richard groveling on the floor. His face was a mask of absolute revulsion. He realized that attaching his pastoral name to a family of convicted federal embezzlers would destroy his own lucrative church empire. He did not offer them a prayer of comfort. I did not extend a helping hand. Pastor Davis shook his head in sheer disgust, turned his back on my parents, and walked swiftly through the side door, abandoning them to their catastrophic fate. The heavy sanctuary doors closed behind Marcus and me with a solid, definitive thud, sealing my toxic family inside the tomb of their own making. The crisp, warm air of the Atlanta morning hit my face the second we stepped out into the parking lot. The sun was shining brightly, casting a golden glow over the hood of Marcus' sleek luxury sedan. I took a deep, cleansing breath, filling my lungs with the sweet scent of absolute freedom. Fast forward, exactly 3 months later. The blazing heat of the southern summer had gradually transitioned into the crisp, cool breeze of early autumn. The leaves on the oak trees lining our upscale neighborhood were turning brilliant shades of orange and gold. My public relations agency was thriving beyond my wildest dreams, completely insulated from the radioactive fallout of my maiden name. Marcus and I were living in absolute peace, our marriage strengthened by the fires we had walked through together. But while my life was blooming with unprecedented joy, the inescapable, ruthless hand of karma was actively dismantling the lives of the people who had tried to destroy me. A devastating montage of divine retribution was about to unfold, showcasing the exact inescapable fallout of their unparalleled greed and staggering arrogance. The consequences hit Richard first, with the absolute devastating force of a runaway freight train. By the time the banking institutions opened on Monday morning, Vanguard Holdings had already executed a flawless, ruthless corporate guillotine. Richard was unceremoniously escorted out of his pristine corner office by 3 armed building security guards. I was forced to carry his personal belongings in a cheap cardboard box, while his former subordinates watched the humiliating spectacle in absolute silence. Sterling Crawford showed zero leniency. The board of directors swiftly stripped Richard of his massive corporate pension, completely nullifying 3 entire decades of ruthless financial climbing. To avoid a 20-year federal prison sentence for high-level wire fraud, Richard was forced to immediately liquidate every single asset he owned. The historic multi-million-dollar brownstone Valerie had bragged about for years was aggressively seized by the bank and sold at a foreclosure auction for pennies on the dollar. His custom-tailored suits were sold to consignment shops. His luxury vehicles were loudly repossessed right out of the driveway before noon. He avoided a federal cell, but he was left with absolutely nothing but the crushing, inescapable weight of his own profound humiliation and permanent financial ruin. Valerie suffered an entirely different, highly public social execution. The elite, gossiping megachurch community she had ruled with a toxic iron fist turned on her with lightning speed. Pastor Davis officially requested she step down from every single pastoral committee to avoid tarnishing his ministry with her toxic scandal. The wealthy women auxiliary groups permanently blocked her phone number. She was entirely ostracized, rendered a complete social pariah overnight. Stripped of her immense stolen wealth and her fake pious reputation, Valerie was forced to move into a cramped, run-down one-bedroom apartment on the extreme outskirts of the city. The peeling wallpaper, stained carpets, and flickering fluorescent lights were a constant, brutal reminder of her massive fall from grace. She spent her long, miserable days hiding behind cheap, faded curtains. She was deeply ashamed to even show her face at the local discount grocery store, absolutely terrified she might run into a woman she used to look down upon. The arrogant matriarch who had constantly belittled my public relations business was now counting loose change just to keep her basic electricity running. Jamal hit absolute rock bottom. The pampered golden child was entirely bankrupt within a matter of days, without my secret monthly transfers paying his exorbitant rent, and without Richard embezzling corporate funds to float his fake startup. Jamal's massive financial house of cards instantly collapsed. His luxury sports car was aggressively repossessed right out of his reserved downtown parking space. His fake venture capitalist friends completely abandoned him the very second the free money dried up. Without a college degree, without any actual marketable skills, and carrying the heavy stigma of a federal fraud investigation, Jamal was forcefully shoved into brutal reality. He ended up taking the only job that would hire him. He was now working the late-night drive-through shift at a local greasy fast food chain. The arrogant man who had proudly stood in my living room and demanded I take out a second mortgage to fund his non-existent empire was now wearing a grease-stained polyester uniform. He smelled like stale cooking oil and cheap fries, forced to hand paper bags of cheap food to teenagers through a sliding glass window for minimum wage while battling exhaustion. Brittany fared even worse. The gold digger had confidently marched out of the church sanctuary, fully expecting to secure a massive, lucrative divorce settlement. But Richard's ironclad morality clause held up flawlessly in family court. She walked away with absolutely zero alimony and zero access to the remaining seized assets. Adding fatal insult to her profound injury, the high-definition audio recording of her vile, racist extortion plot somehow magically leaked onto multiple social media platforms. The internet relentlessly hunted her down. She was universally canceled overnight. The massive public backlash made her completely unemployable across the entire state. The exclusive suburban country clubs permanently banned her from the premises. The elite private preschool waitlists immediately deleted her unborn child application. Stripped of the luxury lifestyle she thought she had successfully stolen, Brittany was reduced to living in a cheap, dingy motel right off the interstate highway. She was forced to survive on minimal government assistance, completely trapped in the exact crushing poverty she had constantly mocked my family for allegedly having. Her grand racist delusion of superiority left her begging for basic survival scraps. Inside her dark, tiny apartment, Valerie sat completely alone on a cheap, sagging mattress. The broken heating system rattled loudly in the background, a stark contrast to the silent climate-controlled luxury she used to demand. She clutched her smartphone in her trembling, unmanicured hands. The screen was severely shattered, thick spiderweb lines obscuring the glass, serving as a perfectly fitting metaphor for her completely broken life. She opened the Instagram application, desperately seeking some kind of mindless digital distraction from her miserable, intensely isolated reality. She scrolled mindlessly through the feeds of wealthy churchwomen who no longer acknowledged her existence, feeling a painful knot of jealousy forming in her throat. Suddenly, a bright notification banner popped up at the very top of her cracked screen. It was an alert from my official, highly verified corporate account. The notification flashed with a bright red icon signaling a live broadcast event. Naomi is broadcasting live now. Valerie's breath hitched in her throat. Her shaking finger hovered hesitantly over the sharp broken glass. Her heart pounded heavily in her chest, a painful mixture of deep regret and toxic curiosity, paralyzing her. She knew she should swipe the notification away and spare herself the agony of seeing my unbothered success. But the overwhelming, desperate need to see the daughter she had so ruthlessly discarded completely overtook her. She could not stop herself from pressing the red icon. The screen went completely black for a brief second before exploding into brilliant, vibrant color. The shaky handheld camera view stabilized, revealing a sweeping cinematic shot of a breathtaking crystal conservatory, draped in thousands of cascading white orchids and imported hydrangeas. Soft golden lighting reflected off towering champagne towers and custom-mirrored dance floors. It was not a simple little party. It was an extravagant multi-million-dollar vow renewal ceremony. Naomi and Marcus had rented out the most exclusive botanical estate in the entire state of Georgia to host the lavish, breathtaking celebration they truly deserved from the very beginning. Valerie's breath hitched as the camera panned across the crowded room. She recognized the guest list immediately, and it made her stomach violently churn with bitter, intense jealousy. The room was not filled with gossiping church committee members or fake suburban socialites. It was packed with genuine elite high society. There were influential corporate executives, prominent media moguls, and highly successful self-made entrepreneurs. The women wore custom haute couture gowns, and the men were dressed in immaculate bespoke tuxedos. They were all raising crystal glasses, laughing genuinely, and celebrating the absolute radiant joy of the couple at the center of the room. Naomi appeared on the screen looking like absolute royalty. She wore a breathtaking custom-designed silk gown that hugged her curves, perfectly adorned with thousands of hand-sewn pearls that caught the light with every single movement. Marcus stood right beside her, looking like a true billionaire king, in a sharp midnight blue tuxedo, his arm wrapped securely around her waist. They were glowing with a profound, untouchable peace. They were surrounded by people who actively poured into their lives, rather than parasitic relatives who only knew how to extract and destroy. The camera lens shifted, focusing on the main VIP family table, positioned directly next to the sweetheart table. Valerie's heart completely shattered when she saw who was sitting in the seats of absolute honor. It was not her. It was not Richard. It was Mr. Henderson, the distinguished Black estate owner, who had stepped in to walk Naomi down the aisle when her own father had ruthlessly abandoned her. Mr. Henderson stood up from his velvet-draped chair, tapping a silver spoon against his crystal champagne flute. The massive ballroom instantly quieted down, giving him their complete and utter undivided respect. He smiled warmly, his kind eyes shining with genuine paternal pride as he looked at Naomi. When I met this beautiful, brilliant young woman a few months ago, Mr. Henderson began, his deep voice carrying flawlessly across the silent conservatory. I saw a fierce, independent spirit. I saw a Black woman who had been forced to carry the heavy burdens of people who did not know how to properly value her light. But instead of letting that disrespect break her, she turned it into an absolute empire. She built her own table when she was denied a seat at the one she was born into. Valerie let out a pathetic, choked sob, clutching her cracked phone tighter. Every single word he spoke was a direct, lethal arrow aimed straight at her chest. She had spent 31 years telling Naomi she was nothing but a party planner. Now a highly respected, wealthy elder was publicly validating her daughter's brilliance to a room full of titans. Family is not just defined by blood, Mr. Henderson continued, raising his glass higher. Blood is simply a biological coincidence. True family is an active daily choice. It is the people who show up for you when the cameras are off. It is the people who stand fiercely by your side when the storms roll in. Naomi, you are the absolute definition of grace and power. You showed everyone in this room what happens when a Black woman finally realizes her own infinite worth and refuses to settle for anything less. It was the greatest honor of my life to walk you down that aisle, and it is an even greater honor to call you my chosen daughter today. To Naomi and Marcus. The entire ballroom erupted into deafening, thunderous applause. The elite crowd rose to their feet, giving the couple a massive standing ovation. Naomi wiped a happy tear from her eye and threw her arms around Mr. Henderson, hugging him with a fierce, genuine love she had never once displayed for Richard. Valerie physically flinched, watching a complete stranger receive the deep, unconditional love and immense respect she had permanently forfeited. But the absolute final devastating blow came just a few seconds later. The camera panned slightly to the left, capturing the man standing directly next to Marcus. Valerie's eyes widened in pure, unadulterated horror. It was Sterling Crawford, the highly respected billionaire chief executive officer of Vanguard Holdings, the exact man Richard had literally begged on his knees to impress for 4 entire years. Sterling was not standing there acting like a distant, untouchable boss. He was laughing warmly, clasping Marcus on the shoulder with genuine brotherly affection. Sterling leaned over and clinked his crystal champagne flute against Naomi's glass, his face radiating absolute respect and admiration for the public relations mastermind who had completely rebranded his global corporation. He was treating my husband and me as absolute equals, as valued peers, in a highly exclusive upper echelon of society. Valerie stared at the glowing screen, completely paralyzed by the staggering magnitude of her own catastrophic failure. The extreme wealth, the flawless high society connections, the powerful elite circle of highly respected Black billionaires clapping for her daughter. It was exactly everything Valerie had desperately craved her entire pathetic life. It was the exact luxurious, untouchable lifestyle she had destroyed her own family to desperately try and simulate. She had sacrificed her only daughter on the altar of her own toxic ego. She had blindly worshipped a broke scammer son and a racist gold-digging daughter-in-law, hoping they would somehow elevate her status. And now the ultimate prize, the absolute pinnacle of elite social standing, was happening right in front of her eyes. But she was permanently locked out of it. She was trapped in a dark, freezing apartment, completely broke, completely alone, forced to watch her discarded daughter rule an empire through the shattered glass of a cheap cellular phone. Valerie dragged her thumb across the jagged cracks of her phone screen. The sharp edges caught her skin, but the physical sting was absolutely nothing compared to the violent, agonizing ache tearing through her chest. She watched the high-definition broadcast illuminate her dark, dingy living room. On the screen, Naomi was radiant. The golden hour sunlight pouring through the glass ceiling of the conservatory wrapped my husband and me in a warm, brilliant halo. We looked like a living painting of absolute, undeniable triumph. Valerie looked away from the phone for a split second, taking in her own bleak reality. The peeling beige wallpaper of her cramped apartment seemed to close in on her, suffocating her with the smell of stale cigarette smoke and cheap bleach. A cold, biting draft leaked through the poorly sealed window, chilling her to the very bone. She could hear the loud, aggressive argument of her neighbors through the paper-thin walls, a brutal reminder of her new social class. This was her permanent future. She had traded a life of unimaginable luxury and elite social standing to protect a husband who was now waiting for federal sentencing, and a son who was currently scrubbing grease off a fast food griddle for minimum wage. She had bet everything she owned on her fake golden child, and she had lost her entire world. On the glowing screen, the soft, elegant string music faded into the background. I stepped forward, taking the microphone from the gilded stand. The massive ballroom fell completely silent. Hundreds of the most influential, powerful people in the country gave me their absolute, undivided attention. Marcus stood right beside me, his presence a towering pillar of quiet, unwavering strength. He reached out and gently intertwined his fingers with mine, his thumb rubbing soothing circles over my knuckles. Valerie leaned closer to her phone, her breath hitching in her throat. She desperately wanted me to mention her. She wanted me to say I missed my mother, to show even a single ounce of sorrow for the family I had left behind. She needed to feel like she still held some sort of emotional power over my life, even if it was just through my residual pain. I looked out at the sea of beautiful, supportive faces. I looked at Mr. Henderson, who was smiling at me with such profound paternal pride, it made my heart swell. I looked at Sterling Crawford, who raised his glass in silent, absolute respect. I looked at my best friend Kiara, who was wiping a happy tear from her cheek. I did not look at the camera. I did not give my toxic blood relatives a single second of my energy. For a very long time, I believed that my value was tied to how much weight I could carry for other people. I began my voice projecting clear and steady across the magnificent room. As Black women, we are so often taught that we have to shrink ourselves to make room for the fragile egos of others. We are told that loyalty means setting ourselves on fire just to keep toxic people warm. We are conditioned to believe that family is an unbreakable obligation, even when that obligation is slowly breaking our spirits and draining our bank accounts. Valerie let out a loud, pathetic sob. She dropped her face into her hands, the crushing weight of her irreversible mistakes pressing down heavily on her shoulders. Every single word I spoke was a precise surgical strike against the abusive narrative she had forced on me for 31 years. But I learned a very hard, very beautiful lesson this year. I continued squeezing Marcus' hand tightly. I learned that you cannot heal in the exact same environment that made you sick. I learned that an empty aisle on your wedding day is not a tragedy. It is a massive, beautiful clearing of the path. It is the universe removing the people who were never meant to walk into your next chapter, so that men of real, genuine character can step up to guide you. The camera zoomed in on Mr. Henderson, who lowered his head humbly as the crowd erupted into a warm, supportive round of applause. Sterling Crawford patted him on the back, a silent acknowledgement between two powerful Black men who understood the true value of protecting and uplifting Black women. Sometimes, I said, letting my voice rise above the clapping, losing the people who were supposed to love you is the exact painful catalyst you desperately need. It forces you to stop begging for scraps at a table where you were never respected. It forces you to walk away and build your own empire. And when you finally do, you realize you never needed their validation at all. You just needed to recognize your own infinite worth. In her freezing apartment, Valerie let the phone slip from her trembling hands. The device clattered onto the cheap linoleum floor, the live stream still playing brightly. She fell to her knees, weeping uncontrollably into the empty, silent room. She was completely erased. I had not spoken her name. I had not expressed any anger or lingering bitterness. I had simply moved on. To be completely forgotten by the daughter she used to torment was the ultimate unbearable punishment. She was nothing to me now, just a ghost from a past life I had successfully escaped. Back in the breathtaking conservatory, I lifted my crystal champagne flute high into the air. The sparkling liquid caught the light, shining like liquid gold. I looked at Marcus, my wonderful, brilliant husband who had stood by me and helped me burn my abuser's empire to the ground. I looked at my chosen family, the people who loved me loudly, proudly, and unconditionally. To building your own table, I toasted, my smile radiating absolute pure joy. And to the beautiful chosen family who pulls up a chair. The ballroom erupted into deafening cheers. Glasses clinked, music swelled, and the room filled with the vibrant energy of a life lived beautifully and authentically. I took a sip of my champagne, leaning my head against Marcus' shoulder. I did not feel a single ounce of regret. I had faced the absolute worst of human betrayal, and I had transformed it into a masterpiece of personal victory. The screen slowly faded to black on my triumphant, unbothered smile, leaving behind the definitive, satisfying truth. Sweet revenge is not about destroying your enemies. It is about letting them watch you achieve absolute glorious peace without them. The greatest lesson here is that your worth is never determined by people who refuse to see it. Family should provide unconditional love, not a cage of toxic expectations. You owe absolutely no one your peace just because you share a bloodline. True strength comes from setting firm boundaries, walking away from abuse, and building an empire in silence. Healing happens the moment you stop begging for a seat at a table where you are not truly respected. Have you ever cut off a toxic relative to protect your peace? Share your story below and subscribe for more empowering content.